Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Margaret Hawthorne, and I've been a forest ranger for 8 years. That might not sound like much, but in 1973, being the first woman ranger in the Monongahela National Forest meant fighting for every scrap of respect I got. The men didn't think I belonged out here in the cranberry wilderness. They figured I'd crack the first time I had to deal with armed poachers or drunk hunters. They were wrong about a lot of things, but they were right about one thing. The mountains can break you if you're not careful. I never believed in mountain devils or ghost stories. Growing up in Charleston, I heard plenty of tales about creatures in the woods, spirits that danced around moonshine stills, demons that made deals with desperate folks. Just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the forest, I figured. Practical explanations existed for everything. Drunk moonshiners seeing things, shadows playing tricks, the wind making noises. But September of '73 changed all that. It started with a call from Sheriff Daniels down in Pocahontas County. "Got reports of a big moonshine operation up in your territory, Maggie," he said, using the nickname that made my teeth grind. "Folks are saying the Murdoch family's got stills all through the cranberry wilderness." I knew the Murdochs by reputation. 3 generations of violent, mean-spirited moonshiners who'd been running illegal whiskey since before Prohibition. Old-timers said Ezekiel Murdoch started the family business back in 1873, during the big famine that hit these mountains. His grandsons, Caleb and Seth, kept the tradition alive with the kind of enthusiasm that left revenue agents in shallow graves. "Any idea where they're set up?" I asked. "Best guess is somewhere near Cranberry Glades. But Maggie," Sheriff Daniels paused, and I could hear him lighting a cigarette. "Be careful up there. Weird things been happening. Flying around those stills. Preacher Morrison went missing last week after saying he was going to pray over their operation." I packed my gear that afternoon. Standard ranger equipment, plus my .38 service revolver and enough supplies for 3 days in the wilderness. The September air felt crisp as I drove the Forest Service road toward Cranberry Glades, leaves just starting to turn yellow and red on the mountainsides. The first sign something was wrong came when I found the trees. About 2 miles from the main trail, I spotted them, a circle of old oaks with symbols burned deep into their bark. Not carved, burned. The marks looked fresh, still black and smoking slightly despite no fire in sight. They formed patterns I didn't recognize, twisted shapes that hurt to look at too long. At the center of the circle sat 3 mason jars filled with clear liquid. I approached carefully, hand resting on my gun. The jars looked ordinary enough, except for one thing. The liquid inside glowed with a faint blue light. Not bright, just enough to notice in the shadows under the trees. I unscrewed one lid and sniffed. Pure alcohol, strong enough to strip paint. But there was something else underneath, something that made my stomach turn. "What in God's name?" I muttered, screwing the lid back on tight. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to find an elderly woman emerging from the trees. She was small and bent, wearing a faded dress and carrying a walking stick carved with religious symbols. Her eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost white. "You shouldn't touch those, child," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "That's devil's bargain shine. Steals your soul right out of your body." "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Hawthorne with the Forest Service. Are you lost?" She shook her head slowly. "Been walking these mountains for 70 years. Ain't lost yet." She pointed at the mason jars with her stick. "But those boys are. The Murdoch boys made a deal with something that ain't human. Their granddaddy did the same back when folks were starving. Promised eternal prosperity for the family line." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What kind of deal?" "The kind that costs more than you can ever pay back," she whispered. "Every 20 years, the debt comes due. The Murdoch men die violent, and something else takes their place. something that looks like them, but ain't. Before I could ask more questions, she turned and walked back into the trees, moving faster than seemed possible for someone her age. I called after her, but she was gone, leaving only the smell of wood smoke and something else, sulfur maybe, or burning hair. I stood there in that circle of burned trees, holding a jar of glowing moonshine, and felt the first real fear I'd experienced since putting on the ranger uniform. The rational part of my mind said the old woman was just another mountain eccentric, telling tall tales to spook the government lady. But the burn marks on those trees were real, the liquid in those jars was real, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of running water and machinery, the unmistakable noise of a working moonshine still. The next morning brought ATF agent David Ironwood to my ranger station. He was a lean man in his 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much of the wrong side of humanity. His credentials checked out, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived more than one shootout with armed bootleggers. "Sheriff Daniels said you might have a lead on the Murdoch operation," he said, accepting a cup of coffee. "We've been tracking them for months. They're supplying half the illegal whiskey between here and Pittsburgh." I told him about the burned trees and the glowing jars, leaving out the old woman's warnings. David listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small black book. "Glowing alcohol usually means chemas. I call additives," he said finally. "These mountain moonshiners sometimes use antifreeze or paint thinner to boost the alcohol content. Kills people, but they don't care as long as it sells." "What about the burn marks?" He shrugged. "Intimidation tactic. Make folks think they're dealing with something supernatural instead of just criminals." That sounded reasonable, logical. I wanted to believe it. We headed out together that afternoon, following game trails deeper into the cranberry wilderness. David carried a pump-action shotgun and enough ammunition to fight a small war. I stuck with my service revolver and radio, though the radio had been acting strange all morning, lots of static and voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. We found the first still around 3 o'clock. It sat in a natural clearing beside a fast-running creek, a complex setup of copper pipes, steel drums, and propane burners. But nobody was tending it. The fire was out, the pipes were cool, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. "Looks abandoned," David said, but his voice was tense. That's when we found Preacher Morrison. He was sitting upright against a tree about 50 yards from the still wearing his Sunday suit and bow tie. From a distance, he looked like he was just resting. Up close, we could see his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with horror at something only he could see. David checked for a pulse and shook his head. "He's been dead for days, but look at this." He held up the preacher's hand. The skin was perfectly preserved, no signs of decay or animal damage. It's like he was freeze-dried. I radioed for backup in a corner, but got only static in response. David tried his own radio with the same result. "Must be atmospheric interference," he said, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. While we waited for our radios to work, David started examining the still more closely. He found another set of mason jars hidden behind one of the drums, filled with the same glowing blue liquid I'd seen the day before. "I need to test this," he said, unscrewing one of the lids. "David, don't." But he was already tipping the jar to his lips, taking a small sip. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his eyes went wide and he stumbled backward, dropping the jar. It shattered against a rock, spilling liquid that hissed and steamed when it hit the ground. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, but his voice sounded different. Older somehow. Rougher. "You okay?" I asked, moving toward him. He held up a hand to stop me. "Fine. Just stronger than I expected." When he looked up, his eyes had changed color. Instead of brown, they were now pale blue, almost white, the same color as the old woman's eyes. "David, your eyes, what about them?" But when he spoke, I could see his breath in the air, even though the afternoon was warm. I backed toward my truck, hand moving toward my gun. Something was very wrong here. Dead preachers who didn't decay, glowing moonshine, and now my partner was acting like a different person entirely. "We should head back," I said carefully. "Get some help up here to process the scene." David smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Oh, I think we should stay a while longer. There's so much more to see." He picked up another jar from the still and took a longer drink. This time, when he lowered it, his skin had taken on a grayish tint. When he breathed out, I could smell sulfur. "The Murdochs have been very busy," he said in a voice that was definitely not his own. 20 years of preparation, and now it's almost time for the harvest. I drew my gun. "Stay back, David. I don't know what's wrong with you, but—" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Nothing's wrong with me, Ranger Hawthorne. I'm finally becoming what I was meant to be." The air around us began to shimmer with heat, even though there was no fire. The abandoned still started making noises, metal groaning, pipes rattling, as if it was coming back to life on its own. And somewhere in the distance I could hear voices singing. Not hymns or folk songs, but something older and darker, in a language that made my teeth ache just to hear it. David took another step toward me, and I saw that his feet weren't quite touching the ground anymore. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've been dead for 3 days, but the work must continue." That's when I started running. I made it back to my truck with David's laughter echoing through the trees behind me. The engine turned over on the third try, and I floored it down the Forest Service road, gravel spraying behind me like gunshots. But when I reached the main highway, David was already there waiting for me. He stood in the middle of the road, still wearing his ATF jacket, but looking wrong in ways I couldn't quite name. His skin had that grayish tint I'd noticed before, and when he smiled, I could see that his teeth were now pointed like a predator's. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just feet from him. "Going somewhere, Margaret?" he asked, walking around to my driver's side window. His movements were too fluid, like he was floating instead of walking. "What happened to you, David?" "I had a drink with some old friends," he said. "The Murdoch family has been very welcoming. They understand the importance of federal cooperation in their business." I threw the truck in reverse, but the engine died. I tried to restart it, but nothing happened. David placed one hand on the hood, and I could see frost forming around his fingers despite the warm afternoon. "The Still Devil wants to meet you," he said. "It has a very interesting proposal." "The what?" "Oh, that's what the locals call it. Been making deals in these mountains for 100 years. Prosperity for some, eternal service for others. Verbicis. Fair arrangement, really." Through the windshield, I could see more figures emerging from the woods. Men and women wearing clothes from different decades, some in modern gear, others in uniforms that looked like they were from the 1950s. All of them had the same grayish skin and pale blue eyes. "Federal agents who got too close to the operation," David explained, following my gaze. "The entity feeds on law enforcement officers. Something about the authority, the oath of service, makes the possession stronger." One of the figures approached my passenger door. It was wearing a Park Service uniform from the 1960s, complete with the old-style ranger hat. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "Come with us, Ranger Hawthorne. Your service is required." I still had my gun, but somehow I didn't think bullets would do much good against these things. Instead, I grabbed the radio and tried one more time to call for backup. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Ranger Hawthorne in Cranberry Wilderness. I need immediate assistance, federal agents down. Repeat." Static filled the radio, but underneath it I could hear something else. Singing. The same dark melody I'd heard at the still, but louder now, more voices joining in. "He doesn't like electronic devices," David said. "Interferes with the spiritual connection." The singing grew louder, and I felt something pressing against my mind. Not thoughts exactly, but images. Scenes of prosperity and power, of respected position and unlimited authority. All I had to do was drink from the mason jar David was now holding through my window. "Just a sip," he said gently, "and you'll understand everything." The liquid glowed brighter than before, almost hypnotic in its blue radiance. Part of me wanted to take it, to end this nightmare and accept whatever was being offered. But I remembered the old woman's warning. Devil's bargain shine that steals your soul. Instead, I pulled out the small cross my grandmother had given me, and pressed it against the truck window. David jerked back like he'd been burned, and Saz. Virile of the other figures hissed and stepped away. "Iron and faith," I whispered, remembering old stories my grandmother used to tell. Some things never change. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. I gunned it forward, scattering the possessed agents, and raced back toward town. But as I drove, I could see more stills in the distance, dozens of them scattered throughout the wilderness like a network of corruption. Smoke rose from their fires, and I could see figures moving around them, more people drawn to whatever the Murdochs and their entity were offering. My radio crackled to life suddenly, clear as a bell. "Ranger Hawthorne, this is Sheriff Daniels. We got reports of missing persons all around Cranberry Wilderness. Whole families just up and disappeared. You see anything strange up there?" "Sheriff, I need backup immediately. Federal agent compromised, possible cult activity, armed and dangerous." The radio went dead again, but not before I heard something else. A voice I recognized as Caleb Murdoch speaking in the background. "Tell her we're waiting," he said. "Tell her the contract is almost ready to sign." I made it to the little church in Hillsboro just as the sun was setting. Reverend Williams was locking up for the evening, but he took one look at my face and ushered me inside. "Child, you look like you've seen the devil himself," he said, leading me to a pew. "I think I have," I told him, and explained everything that had happened. Reverend Williams listened without interruption, occasionally nodding like what I was saying made perfect sense. When I finished, he walked to a cabinet behind the altar and pulled out an old leather journal. "This belonged to my predecessor," he said, "Reverend Ashworth. He wrote about the Murdoch family and their arrangement." He opened the journal and read aloud. "September 1893, 20 years. To the day since Ezekiel Murdoch made his unholy bargain, his son Isaiah was found burned alive beside the family still. Yet Isaiah continues to walk among the living, changed. The entity that dwells in the moonshine has claimed another generation." "Every 20 years, I said, understanding. "The debt comes due. According to this, Caleb and Seth Murdoch are approaching their 20th year of service. The entity will claim them soon unless what? Unless it finds a suitable replacement, someone with authority, someone whose soul carries weight." He looked at me meaningfully. "A federal law enforcement officer would be perfect." I felt my blood go cold. "It wants me to take their place. Or join them." The journal mentions contracts written in blood, binding souls to eternal service in exchange for temporary prosperity. Reverend Williams closed the book carefully. "But there's hope. The original contract is supposedly hidden somewhere in the Murdoch compound. Destroy it and the entity loses its hold on this place." He gave me a vial of holy water and blessed my gun with a prayer I didn't recognize, but that felt powerful nonetheless. As I prepared to leave, he grabbed my arm. "The entity feeds on despair and corruption," he said urgently. "Don't let it make you doubt yourself. Faith is your strongest weapon." I drove back into Cranberry Wilderness as darkness fell, following the glow of still fires deeper into the mountains. The network of illegal distilleries had grown even larger, and I could see people moving between them like sleepwalkers, all heading in the same direction. At the center of it all sat the largest still I'd ever seen. It was built in a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, with copper pipes and steel drums arranged in complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. Fires burned underneath without any visible fuel, and the whole setup pulsed with that eerie blue light. Dozens of people stood around it in concentric circles, local townspeople, missing federal agents, and at the center, the Murdoch brothers. Caleb and Seth looked like they were already dead. Their skin was charred black in places, and flames flickered around their heads like unholy halos. But they moved and spoke as if nothing was wrong. And behind them, rising from the largest distillation tank like steam-given form, was the still devil itself. It was huge, easily 12 feet tall, made of blue fire and alcohol vapor that shifted and writhed constantly. Where its face should have been, I saw only an endless void filled with the screams of everyone it had ever consumed. "Ranger Hawthorne," it spoke, and its voice came from everywhere at once. "So good of you to join us." David stepped out of the crowd, still wearing his ATF jacket, but clearly no longer human. "The entity has a proposition for you," he said. The still devil gestured, and suddenly I could see everything it was offering. Visions filled my mind. Respect from my male colleagues, promotion to district supervisor, a career without the constant struggle to prove myself. All the things I'd worked so hard for, handed to me effortlessly. 20 years of prosperity, the entity whispered. And then, eternal service, just like your friends here. I looked around at the possessed agents and townspeople. Some of them had been dead for decades, I realized. But the entity kept them moving, working, serving its purpose. "What about them?" I asked, pointing to Caleb and Seth. "Their contracts expire tonight," the still devil said. "But they've served well. They've brought me so many new souls, especially law enforcement. Federal agents are particularly nutritious." Caleb Murdoch laughed, a sound like burning wood. "Been a good run, devil, but I'm ready to rest." "Oh, but you won't rest," the entity replied. "You'll become part of me. Forever." That's when I understood the true horror of the bargain. There was no retirement, no peaceful end. Just endless consumption by something that fed on human souls. "I have a counter-offer," I said, pulling out my gun. The still devil laughed. "Bullets cannot harm me, child." "Maybe not," I said, "but they can sure harm your operation." I started shooting, not at the entity, but at the still itself. My blessed bullets tore through copper pipes and steel drums, sending that glowing blue liquid spraying everywhere. Where it hit the possessed townspeople, they screamed and began to smoke. The still devil roared in fury, reaching for me with hands made of flame. But I was already moving, dodging between the distillation equipment while firing at every tank and pipe I could see. "The contract," Reverend Williams' voice echoed in my memory. "Destroy the original contract." I spotted it then, a piece of parchment nailed to a wooden post at the very center of the operation. It was covered in what looked like dried blood, and the air around it shimmered with heat. The still devil realized what I was after and lunged toward me, but the destruction of its equipment was weakening it. The possessed agents moved to block my path, but the holy water I'd splashed on my clothes earlier made them hesitate to get too close. I reached the contract and grabbed it, the parchment burning my hands even through my gloves. The still devil screamed as I pulled out the vial of holy water and poured it over the ancient document. The effect was immediate and devastating. The contract burst into flames that burned white instead of blue, and the still devil began to collapse in on itself like a deflating balloon. The possessed agents fell to the ground, finally at peace. The fires went out all at once, plunging the amphitheater into darkness. But in the silence that followed, I heard something that chilled my blood. A whisper, barely audible. "The contract is void, but the debt remains." I walked out of those mountains alone. The official report listed it as an industrial accident at an illegal distillery, explosive gas buildup from improper equipment. David Ironwood was listed as killed, in the line of duty, which was true enough. The townspeople who'd been possessed had no memory of what happened, and the doctors said they were suffering from mass carbon monoxide poisoning. I let them believe it. I transferred to a different district the following month, citing personal reasons. My supervisor was understanding. "Losing a partner in the field can mess with your head," he said. "Take some time, get your bearings back." But I never really got my bearings back. The burn mark on my palm where I'd grabbed the contract never fully healed. It's faded over the years, but on certain nights, especially in September, it still glows with a faint blue light. A reminder of what I'd touched, what I'd faced. The Cranberry Wilderness area around the old Murdoch compound was declared a toxic waste site 6 months later. Officially, dangerous chemicals from the illegal distillery had contaminated the soil and groundwater. The whole valley was fenced off and marked with warning signs. But I know the real reason it was closed. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, folks in the surrounding counties still report hearing singing coming from those mountains. Not hymns or folk songs, but something older and darker, in a language that makes your teeth ache just to hear it. The local church held a special service that winter. "Cleansing of the Mountain," Reverend Williams called it. Most of the surviving townspeople attended, grateful to be free of whatever had been calling to them in the darkness. But during the service, I noticed some of them still had that hungry look in their eyes, like they were listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. I've been a ranger for 15 years now, working different forests in different states. But every September, on the anniversary of that night, I get a letter. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in West Virginia. It's always the same message, written in handwriting that looks like my own. The contract is void, but the debt remains. I used to throw them away, but I've kept the last few because I've started to notice things, small things, the way alcohol tastes different now, stronger somehow, the way my reflection sometimes looks wrong in mirrors, like there's something standing behind me that isn't there when I turn around. And sometimes, late at night, I catch myself humming a melody I don't remember learning, something dark and old that makes my teeth ache. The rational part of my mind says it's just trauma, phantom memories from a stressful incident. PTSD is common among law enforcement officers who've survived violent encounters, but the burn mark on my palm glows a little brighter each year. And every September I find myself looking at maps of West Virginia, wondering if that valley is really as empty as the government claims, wondering if something might still be out there, waiting patiently for the debt to be paid. They say you can't make a deal with the devil and come out clean. I'm starting to think they're right. Last week I found a mason jar on my doorstep, clear glass, filled with liquid that glows faintly blue in the darkness. There was a note tied around it with string, for old time's sake. I haven't opened it yet, but God help me, I want to. Some nights, when the loneliness gets bad and the job feels too hard and I'm tired of fighting for respect in a man's world, I hold that jar up to the light and think about how easy it would be. Just one sip, just enough to take the edge off. The entity might be gone, but its influence lingers like smoke in old clothes. And I'm starting to understand what the old woman meant when she said the debt remains. Some prices you pay forever, even when you think you've won. My name is Joseph Wintermoon, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Lost hikers, bear attacks, flash floods. I handled them all. But I never believed in the old stories, the Cherokee tales my grandmother told, the Celtic legends the Scottish settlers brought with them. I was wrong to doubt. It started in March 1968, when the dogwoods were just beginning to bloom in Cataloochee Valley. I got a call from headquarters about some hikers who'd come running out of the valley, scared half to death. They claimed they'd heard a woman crying somewhere deep in the woods, but when they went to help, the sound got louder and more terrible until they couldn't stand it anymore. It wasn't normal crying, one of them told me, his hands still shaking. It was like someone had lost everything in the world. Made us feel so sad we wanted to die ourselves. I figured it was just the wind through the trees. The valley does strange things with sound, especially near the old settlement areas where families lived before the park was created. But when I drove out there to check, something felt wrong from the moment I stepped out of my truck. The valley was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just silence, heavy and thick like a blanket. Even the stream seemed to run quieter than usual. I walked the old trails where the Mloud family and other settlers once lived. Most of their cabins were gone now, just stone foundations and chimneys marking where people had tried to make homes in these wild mountains. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. Fresh flowers, mountain laurel, wild roses, and other blooms were placed carefully on what looked like old grave sites. The flowers weren't wilted. They'd been put there recently, but Cataloochee Valley was miles from any road, and I hadn't seen any other vehicles when I came in. I knelt down next to one of the flower clusters. The ground underneath was sunken slightly, the way earth settles over a grave after many years. There were 7 of these spots, all small, arranged in a neat row under a massive oak tree. Children's graves. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I'd studied the history of this area, and I knew about the families who'd lived here before the park was established. Disease had taken many children in those days, diphtheria, scarlet fever, accidents that would be easily treated now. But who was bringing fresh flowers to graves that were over 100 years old? As I stood up, I heard it. Faint at first, like wind through leaves, but growing clearer. A woman's voice crying somewhere in the distance, not calling for help, just mourning. The sound was so full of grief it made my chest hurt. I called out, "Hello, do you need assistance?" But the crying stopped immediately, like someone had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was worse than the crying. It felt like the whole valley was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I radioed headquarters to report what I'd found, but when I tried to describe the crying, my supervisor just told me to file a standard report about the scattered grave sites. "Probably just teenagers messing around," he said. "Write it up and move on." But I couldn't move on. That night at home, I called my grandmother. She was full Cherokee and knew all the old stories better than anyone. "Grandmother," I said, "tell me about the Mloud family, the Scottish settlers in Cataloochee." There was a long pause. "Why do you ask about them, grandson?" "I found children's graves today. Someone's been leaving flowers." Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah Mloud lost 7 children to the fever in 1847. After the last one died, she walked into the mountains and never came back. Some say she made a bargain with the spirits to watch over all the mountain children forever." "What kind of bargain?" "The kind that changes you into something else, something that can't rest until every child is safe." My grandmother's voice got quiet. "Joseph, if you're hearing her cry, it means she's found children who need protecting. The question is, protecting them from what?" The next morning I drove back to Cataloochee with Dr. Amanda Riversong, a historian from the university who specialized in Appalachian settlement patterns. I'd called her because I needed someone who could help me understand what I'd found. Amanda was in her 30s, enthusiastic about her work and completely skeptical about anything supernatural. "Folk stories are fascinating," she said as we hiked toward the grave sites, "but they're usually just ways people explain things they didn't understand." I showed her the 7 small graves with their fresh flowers. She took pictures and measurements, getting excited about the historical significance. "This could be an important find, Joseph. If we can prove these are settler graves, it might help us understand daily life in the early settlement period." But when she knelt down to examine the flowers more closely, her expression changed. "These were picked this morning," she said slowly. "The stems are still wet with dew." We looked around the empty valley. No other people, no vehicles, no signs that anyone else had been there. "Maybe someone came in before dawn," Amanda suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. I led her to the ruins of the Mloud cabin, about a quarter-mile up the ridge. The stone foundation was still mostly intact along with the chimney. What was left of the wooden walls had rotted away decades ago. Amanda was photographing the foundation stones when she stopped suddenly. "Joseph, come look at this." On the hearthstone, burned deep into the rock itself, were small hand prints. 7 of them, different sizes, like children had pressed their hands into the stone while it was somehow soft. "That's impossible," Amanda whispered. "Stone doesn't work that way. These would have had to be made when the rock was molten." I touched one of the handprints. It was exactly the size of a 5-year-old's hand. The stone around it was cold, but the print itself felt warm. "Maybe it's some kind of mineral deposit," Amanda said, but she was taking pictures fast, like she was afraid the prints might disappear. That's when we heard the crying again. This time it was closer, coming from the direction of the children's graves. A woman's voice, broken with grief, speaking words we couldn't quite understand. Amanda grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. The crying grew louder, more desperate. It wasn't just sadness. It was the sound of someone who had lost everything and couldn't stop the pain. It made me want to cry too, just hearing it. Then we saw her. At first, just a shape moving between the trees near the graves. A woman in a long, dark dress kneeling beside the flowers. Her hair was loose and wild, and her shoulders shook with sobs. "Ma'am," I called out, "are you all right?" The woman looked up at us, and Amanda made a choking sound. The woman's face was beautiful but ancient, with eyes that held more pain than any person should ever carry. When she saw us watching, she stood slowly. "My children," she said, and her voice carried clearly across the distance, even though she wasn't shouting. "I must keep my children safe." "Where are your children?" I asked, walking slowly toward her. "We can help." But as I got closer, the woman began to fade, like morning mist burning off in sunlight. In seconds, she was gone completely. Amanda was breathing hard beside me. "Did you see? Was she really?" "Yeah," I said. "I saw her twin." We searched the area around the graves but found no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. The flowers were still fresh, still perfectly arranged. Amanda's hands were shaking as she rewound her camera. "I got pictures," she said. "If she was really there, the camera will have caught something." But when we developed the film later that day, all the photos of the woman were blank, just empty forest where she should have been standing. The photos of the handprints came out perfectly, though. 7 small prints burned into solid stone, clear as day. That night, Amanda called me from her hotel. "Joseph, I've been researching the Mloud family. Sarah Mloud had 7 children who died in a diphtheria outbreak in 1847. Mary, age 12, Robert, age 10, twins James and John, age 8, Catherine, age 6, William, age 4, and baby Elizabeth, just 18 months old." She paused. According to the records, Sarah disappeared 3 days after Elizabeth's funeral. A search party found her tracks leading deep into the mountains, but they never found her body. "So she's been dead for over a century," I said. "That's what I thought. But Joseph, I found something else. There are reports going back decades of children going missing in this area. Not many, maybe 1 every few years. But the strange thing is, most of them are found later, completely unharmed, with no memory of where they've been." The line was quiet for a moment. "What if Sarah Mloud is still out there? What if she's been taking children, thinking she's protecting them?" I didn't answer, but I was thinking about the warmth in those stone handprints, and the way the woman had said, "my children," like she owned them. The next day, everything changed. Amanda and I returned to Cataloochee to continue documenting the site, but we weren't alone anymore. A family from Tennessee was camping in the valley. Tom and Linda Patterson with their 8-year-old son, Billy. They'd gotten permission for a backcountry camping trip, something that was still allowed in parts of the park back then. I introduced myself and Dee reminded them of the basic safety rules, but Billy was more interested in exploring than listening to a park ranger. He was a bright kid, curious about everything, asking questions about the mountains and the animals. "Are there any ghosts here?" he asked me with the matter-of-fact way kids talk about scary things. "No ghosts," I told him. "Just lots of history." But I was wrong. That evening, while Amanda and I were examining more of the cabin ruins, we heard Tom Patterson shouting from their campsite. We ran back to find him and his wife searching frantically through the woods with flashlights. "Billy's gone," Tom said, his voice tight with panic. "He was right here by the fire, and then we heard a woman singing somewhere in the trees. Beautiful singing, like a lullaby. Billy got up and walked toward it like he was sleepwalking. When we tried to follow, the singing stopped and Billy was just gone." We organized a search immediately. I radioed for backup and got every available ranger heading to Cataloochee. But as we searched through the night, calling Billy's name, we kept hearing that singing, always just out of reach, always leading us deeper into the mountains. Amanda found me around midnight. "Joseph, I've been thinking about those missing children I researched. What if Sarah doesn't realize she's dead? What if she thinks she's still a mother, still trying to save children from danger?" "But there's no danger," I said. "Billy was perfectly safe with his parents." "Was he?" "Sarah lost 7 children to disease. In her mind, every child is in constant danger. Every child needs to be protected." The singing started again, closer this time. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, like a mother comforting a scared child. But there was something wrong with it too, something that made my skin crawl. We followed the sound to a limestone cave system I'd never seen before, hidden behind a curtain of mountain laurel. The singing was coming from inside. "Billy?" I called into the darkness. "Billy, are you in there?" A child's voice answered, but it wasn't quite right. "I'm safe now," the voice said. "The nice lady is taking care of me." Tom pushed past me toward the cave entrance, but I grabbed his arm. Something about this felt like a trap. "Billy, come out here so we can see you," I called. "I can't," the child's voice replied. "She says I can't leave until it's safe. She's showing me all the ways children die in the mountains. Bears and snakes and falling rocks and getting lost and starving and freezing and drowning and the fever and so many ways to die. But here I'm safe, forever." Amanda was taking pictures of the cave entrance, but when her flash went off, we saw something impossible. For just a moment, the cave entrance showed not darkness, but a warm, cozy cabin interior. A woman in pioneer dress sat by a fireplace, and around her were children. Lots of children, more than 7. Some wore clothes from the 1800s, others looked more modern, and they were all the wrong age. Billy Patterson sat among them, but he looked older, much older, like he'd aged years in just a few hours. "That's not possible," Tom whispered. The flash faded, and the cave was dark again. But now we could hear other voices inside. Children talking and laughing, but the voices sounded old, tired, like they'd been there for a very long time. "She keeps us safe," Billy's voice said again, but now it sounded like an adult speaking. "No one can hurt us here. No one can take us away. We're her children now." Amanda grabbed my arm. "Joseph, we have to get him out of there." But when I tried to enter the cave, I couldn't. It was like walking into a wall of thick air that pushed me back. The cave was there, but somehow I couldn't reach it. "Billy!" Tom shouted desperately. "Billy, come home!" The singing started again, louder now. But this time it wasn't comforting. It was possessive, angry. The voice of a mother who would never let her children go. "She doesn't want us to leave," Billy said, and his voice was definitely older now. "She loves us too much to let us go back to the dangerous world. Here we can be children forever, and nothing bad will ever happen to us." That's when I understood. Sarah Mloud wasn't just protecting children. She was keeping them. Forever. And Billy Patterson was just the latest addition to her collection. I knew I had to act fast. Whatever was happening to Billy in that impossible cave, it was changing him in ways that might not be reversible. I sent the other rangers to take Tom and Linda Patterson back to safety, then radioed my grandmother. If anyone knew how to deal with Cherokee spirits, it would be her. "Grandmother, I need to know about Sarah Mloud's bargain. What exactly did she promise the spirits?" "Grandson, some knowledge is dangerous. A child's life is at stake." There was a long pause. "Sarah promised to guard all mountain children in exchange for the power to keep them safe forever. But the spirits warned her that love without wisdom becomes a prison. She didn't listen. How do I break the bargain?" "You don't break it, Joseph. You complete it. Sarah must choose to let the children go, or the Cherokee spirits must take back what they gave her. But either way, there will be a price." Amanda was documenting everything, taking notes and photos, but I could see she was scared. The rational part of her mind was fighting with what she was witnessing. "Joseph," she said quietly, "I've been thinking. If Sarah can take children outside normal time, if she can keep them in some kind of pocket dimension, how many children has she collected over the years?" Before I could answer, the cave entrance began to glow with soft, warm light. Sarah Mloud stepped out, but she looked different now, more solid, more real. And behind her came the children. Billy was there, but he looked and cared like a teenager now. Other children followed, some in modern clothes, others in period dress from different decades. They all had the same strange, ancient look in their eyes, like they'd lived much longer than their apparent ages. "You've come for the boy," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of a century of grief. "But he's safe now. They're all safe." "Sarah," I said carefully, "these children have families who love them. They need to go home." Her beautiful face twisted with pain. Home? To die of fever like my Mary? To fall from cliffs like so many mountain children? To starve in winter when the snows come early? She shook her head violently. "I won't let it happen. Never again." Amanda stepped forward. "Mrs. Mloud, I know about your children. I know how much you love them. But keeping these children isn't helping them live. It's stopping them from living." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger, and the temperature around us dropped 30 degrees instantly. "What do you know of love? You have no children. You've never held a baby in your arms and watched the fever take them away. You've never buried 7 little souls and felt your heart die with them." The children stood silently behind her, watching with those 2 old eyes. Billy looked at his reflection in Amanda's camera lens and seemed confused by what he saw. "I remember being 8, he said slowly, "but I feel so much older now. Mother Sarah showed me everything, all the ways children die, all the pain they suffer. It's better to be safe here." "No," I said firmly. "It's better to be alive." Sarah raised her hand, and the wind began to howl through the valley. Trees bent and creaked, and the temperature kept dropping. "I won't let you take them. I won't watch more children die." That's when I heard them. Drums in the distance, growing louder. Cherokee drums. And with them came voices singing in the old language. The spirits my grandmother had called were coming. Sarah heard them too, and for the first time she looked afraid. "They can't take them," she whispered. "I made a bargain. I gave everything to protect these children." "You gave everything to steal them," a new voice said. An old Cherokee man emerged from the forest, followed by others. Spirits of the ancestors, translucent but powerful. My grandmother was among them, though I knew she was still alive, miles away. This was her spirit form, sent to help. "Sarah Mloud," the old man said, "you have broken the sacred balance. Love without freedom is not love at all." "I saved them," Sarah screamed, and the very air around us crackled with supernatural energy. "Every one of them would have died without me." "Some would have died," my grandmother's spirit agreed, "but others would have lived full lives, had families, brought joy to the world. You stole their choices." The Cherokee spirits began to circle Sarah and the children, chanting in the old language. Sarah tried to retreat toward the cave, but found her way blocked. "Choose," the old man commanded. "Release the children willingly and find peace, or we will take back the power we gave you, and you will fade forever." Sarah looked at the children clustered around her, her artificial family, stolen from across the decades. For a moment, her face showed the loving mother she had once been. "If I let them go," she whispered, "they might die." "If you keep them," I said gently, "they'll never really live." Sarah closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with fresh tears. I just wanted them to be safe. I just wanted to be a mother again. She knelt down and touched Billy's face. As her hand made contact, he began to grow younger, returning to his 8-year-old self. The ancient knowledge faded from his eyes, replaced by normal child confusion. One by one, she touched each child, releasing them from her artificial protection. Some faded away, returning to their proper times. Others, the more recent ones, remain, but looked normal again, lost, scared, but truly alive. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to each child as she released them. "I'm so sorry." When the last child was freed, Sarah looked up at the Cherokee spirits. "Will I see my own children again?" The old man nodded. "They have been waiting for you to let go of your pain." 7 small figures materialized around Sarah. Her real children, Mary and Robert and the twins and Catherine and William and baby Elizabeth. They looked exactly as they had when the fever took them, but they were smiling. "Mama," little Elizabeth said, taking Sarah's hand, "we've been waiting so long for you to come home." Sarah Mloud smiled for the first time in over a century, and then she and her children faded into peaceful light. Billy Patterson ran to me, crying and confused but completely himself again. The other displaced children, those from recent decades, were returned safely to their proper times and places through methods I still don't fully understand. The Cherokee spirits faded back into the forest, their work done. Amanda and I brought Billy back to his parents, who had been searching frantically for 3 days. To them, he'd been missing for 72 hours. To Billy, it felt like years. We told the Pattersons that Billy had gotten lost in a cave system and hit his head, which explained his confusion and fragmented memories. The official report listed it as a standard search and rescue operation. But Amanda and I knew the truth. She left for the university a week later, taking her photographs and research notes. The pictures of the handprints came out clearly, but all her photos of Sarah and the supernatural events showed only empty forest. "Maybe that's for the best," she told me before leaving. "Some stories are too big for the world to believe." I transferred to a desk job 6 months later. I still patrol the Smokies sometimes, but I avoid Cataloochee Valley. The Cherokee Tribal Council performs a ceremony there every year now to honor Sarah Mloud's children and keep the spiritual balance intact. Every March, on Terier's. The anniversary of that night, I receive a photograph in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a simple picture of 7 children playing in a meadow of wildflowers, their faces bright with joy. They look exactly like the Mloud children would have if they'd been allowed to grow up happy and free. I keep those photos in my desk drawer, along with Amanda's research notes and my grandmother's written account of the Cherokee spirit's involvement, evidence of something the world isn't ready to understand. Sometimes I wonder about the children Sarah took over the years. Did they all make it back to their proper lives? Are there still temporal echoes of her protection scattered through time? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. But I do know this. Love without wisdom can become the cruelest prison of all. And sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. The mountains keep their secrets, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. But every time I see a parent holding their child a little too tightly, trying to protect them from every possible harm, I think of Sarah Mloud. And I remember that children need more than safety. They need the freedom to live. My name is Rebecca Stormridge, and I've been a park ranger for 10 years now. I work in the Daniel Boone National Forest, down in the Red River Gorge area of Kentucky. Most folks know me as the Cave Lady. I'm the one they call when someone gets lost underground or when we need to check out new cave systems. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy worked the coal mines until they shut down, and my mama always told stories about things that lived deep in the earth. "There's more down there than just coal and rock," she'd say. But I never believed in that old mountain talk. I thought it was just stories miners told to scare each other. The summer of 1979 started out normal enough. Hot days, thick air that stuck to your skin, and tourists coming to see our caves. I'd been doing cave rescues for so long that I could find my way through the darkness with my eyes closed. The underground felt like home to me, cool, quiet, and safe. That all changed when the Hendricks family came stumbling out of Mammoth Cave on a Tuesday morning in July. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. 3 people found wandering around naked near the cave entrance, talking nonsense about deep ones and voices in the walls. Sheriff Paulson thought they were on drugs, but when I got there, I knew something else was wrong. Jim Hendricks was a good man. I'd seen him take groups through those caves 100 times. He knew every tunnel and chamber like the back of his hand. But when I found him sitting on a rock with a blanket around his shoulders, his eyes looked empty. "Rebecca," he said when he saw me. His voice was shaky. "They took everything. Our lights, our ropes, our clothes. They said we didn't need them anymore." "Who took them, Jim?" He looked at me like I was crazy. "The pale ones. The ones who live in the deep places. They wanted us to stay with them forever. His wife Sarah was crying, and their teenage son Tommy just stared at the ground. All three of them had this strange, lost look, like they'd seen something that broke a part of their minds. I drove them to the hospital and filed my report, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Jim had said. I'd been in those caves hundreds of times. There was nothing down there but rocks and water and the occasional bat. But that night, I had the strangest dream. I was walking through a cave I'd never seen before, one with smooth walls that looked almost polished. I could hear voices echoing from somewhere deep ahead of me, speaking in an old-timey way of talking that reminded me of my great-grandmother. In the dream, the voices were calling my name, asking me to come deeper, to stay with them in the dark places where the sun never reached. I woke up with my heart pounding and my sheets soaked with sweat. The next morning, I decided to take another look at the cave where they found the Hendricks family. I brought my best flashlight and my radio, but when I got to the entrance, something felt different. The air coming out of the cave was warmer than usual, and it had a strange smell, like old earth and something else I couldn't quite name. I'd been in this cave 100 times, but as I walked deeper, I started noticing things I'd never seen before. Tool marks on the walls that looked old, older than any mining equipment we'd ever used in these parts. Strange scratches in the rock that almost looked like writing. About half a mile in, I found a passage I'd never seen before. It was narrow, just wide enough for one person, and it led down at a steep angle. My maps didn't show anything like this. I'd helped survey this cave myself 5 years ago, and this tunnel simply hadn't been there. I stood at the entrance to that dark passage, listening, and I swear I heard something. Voices, far away and echoing, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The sound made my skin crawl, but I couldn't tell if it was scary or sad. I marked the spot and headed back to the surface. That night, I called Dr. Marcus Deepwell, a geologist friend of mine who worked at the university. I told him about the new passage and asked if he wanted to help me map it out. "Caves don't just appear, Rebecca," he said with a laugh. "But I'd love to take a look. These old mountain systems are full of surprises." I didn't tell him about the voices. I didn't tell him about my dreams. I just said we needed to update our maps. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to discover something that had been hidden for a very long time. Something that maybe should have stayed hidden. Marcus arrived the next Thursday with enough equipment to map half the mountain. He was excited about the discovery, talking about how new passages could tell us about water flow and rock formation. I let him talk while I loaded my pack with extra batteries and rope. We entered the cave early in the morning when the air was still cool. Marcus chattered about limestone formations and underground rivers as we made our way to the new passage. But the deeper we went, the quieter he became. "The acoustics are strange down here," he said, stopping to listen. "Sound carries differently than it should." I heard it too. Our voices seemed to echo for longer than normal, and sometimes I thought I caught other sounds mixed in with our echoes, like whispers just at the edge of hearing. When we reached the narrow passage I'd found, Marcus shone his light down into the darkness. The tunnel stretched further than our lights could reach, disappearing into black. "This is definitely not on any survey," he said, pulling out his instruments. "The walls are too smooth. This isn't natural erosion." We squeezed through the opening and started down. The passage was tight, forcing us to move single file. Marcus went first, talking into his voice recorder about measurements and angles. I followed, trying to ignore the way the walls seemed to press in around us. After about 20 minutes of careful climbing, the passage opened into a chamber I'd never imagined could exist. Our lights revealed a space the size of a church, with a ceiling that vanished into shadows above us. But what made my breath catch weren't the size. It was what was inside. The walls were covered in carvings. Not random scratches, but careful pictures and symbols that spiraled around the chamber from floor to ceiling. Some looked like people, but the people changed as the carvings went higher. They started normal but got taller and thinner, with bigger eyes and longer fingers. "My God," Marcus whispered. "Rebecca, look at this." He was kneeling next to what looked like a fireplace, but instead of stones, it was made from bones. Old bones, yellowed with age. Nearby were tools, hammers and knives carved from rock, but made with skill that spoke of years of practice. "Someone lived here," I said, "for a long time." "Not just lived," Marcus said, moving his light across the walls. "Look at these carvings. They tell a story. People coming underground, changing, becoming something else." I studied the pictures more closely. The early ones showed normal folks, miners maybe, with their tools and lamps. But as the story progressed, the people got paler, their eyes got larger, and their bodies got thinner. In the final pictures, they looked almost like a different species entirely. "Marcus," I said, "we need to document this and get out. This feels like a tomb." But Marcus was already moving deeper into the chamber, following a stream of water that trickled along one wall. "There's more back here," he called. "This connects to other passages." I followed reluctantly. The stream led to another narrow opening, and beyond that we found more chambers. Room after room of carved walls, bunts, tools, and signs that people had lived here for generations. But there were no recent signs of life. No fresh food, no warm ashes, nothing to suggest anyone had been here recently. In the Ishiriyon. Fifth chamber, we found the garden. Plants grew in carefully tended rows, but they were like nothing I'd ever seen. Pale, almost white, with thick stalks and strange twisted leaves. They grew without any sunlight, fed by the mineral-rich water that seeped through the cave walls. "This is impossible," Marcus said, but his voice had changed. Instead of sounding amazed, he sounded hungry. Like he wanted to understand these plants, to study them forever. I was about to suggest we head back when we heard it. Singing. It was faint, echoing from somewhere deeper in the cave system, but it was definitely human voices. Old songs, sung in harmony, with words I couldn't quite make out. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a church hymn mixed with a lullaby. Marcus stopped talking and tilted his head to listen. "Do you hear that? We need to leave. Now." But Marcus was already walking toward the sound, his light bobbing as he moved between the strange plants. "Just a little further. We need to find who's down here." I grabbed his arm. "Marcus, think about what happened to the Hendricks family. They came out talking about people in the caves. We need to report this and come back with a full team." He pulled away from me, but gently. "Rebecca, this could be the discovery of a lifetime. People living underground, developing their own culture. We can't just walk away." The singing got louder, and now I could make out some of the words. They were singing in English, but it was Old English, the kind my grandmother's grandmother might have spoken. Words about going home, about finding peace in the deep places. Against my better judgment, I followed Marcus toward the sound. We climbed down through 3 more chambers, each one larger than the last. The carvings on the walls got more complex, showing not just the transformation of people, but their daily lives. Hunting strange, pale nimals, growing the white plants, building homes from shaped stone and clay. And then we saw our first hollow person. It was standing at the far end of a chamber, just at the edge of our lights. Tall and thin, with skin so pale it seemed to glow. Its eyes were huge, taking up most of its face, and when our lights hit them, they reflected back like an animal's. The singing stopped. The creature, the person, looked at us for a long moment. Then it spoke. "Strangers in the deep places," it said in that old-fashioned way of talking. "You walk where the sun folk don't belong." Marcus stepped forward, and I noticed his hands were shaking. "We're explorers. We mean no harm. We just want to understand." The pale person tilted its head, studying us. "Understanding comes with staying. The deep places change all who linger long." That's when I saw the others. They emerged from shadows and side passages we hadn't noticed, at least a dozen of them, all tall and pale, with those huge, dark eyes. They moved silently like they'd been watching us for a while. "We should go," I whispered to Marcus. But when I looked at him, his pupils were dilated, and he was staring at the pale people with fascination instead of fear. Maybe we should listen to what they have to say, he said. And I realized that whatever was happening to people who came down here, it was already starting to happen to him. The pale people surrounded us, but they didn't feel threatening. They moved like water, silent and graceful, and their huge eyes seemed more curious than hostile. The one who had spoken first stepped closer, and I could see that despite the strange proportions, there was something deeply human about their face. I am called Jeremiah, the pale person said. I was young when I came to the deep places. That was many seasons of sun ago. How many seasons? Marcus asked, and I could hear the hunger in his voice. He wanted to know everything. Jeremiah thought for a moment. The great cave-in was when I arrived, when the mountain fell and trapped us below. That was 70 circles of seasons past. My blood went cold. 70 years ago, there had been a mining disaster in these mountains. An entire shift of miners had been buried alive when a shaft collapsed. They were never found. You're from the Sweetwater mine collapse, I said. But that's impossible. You'd be old, yes, dead, yes. In the sun world, that would be true. Jeremiah's huge eyes focused on me. But the deep places are kind to those who accept them. We change, but we endure. More pale people emerged from the shadows. Men and women, though it was hard to tell the difference. Some wore clothes made from woven plant fibers. Others had garments that looked like they'd been carved from soft stone. All of them had that same stretched, elongated look, as if they'd been pulled toward the center of the earth. Marcus, I said quietly, we need to document this and leave. People need to know about this. But Marcus was already walking among them, asking questions about their society, their food, their way of life. And the more he talked to them, the more relaxed he became, like he belonged here. They've developed an entire civilization, he said to me, his eyes bright with excitement. Rebecca, do you understand what this means? People adapting to live completely underground. Evolution in action. One of the pale women approached me. She moved with that same flowing grace, but there was something sad about her expression. Your friend hears the deep song, she said. It calls to some stronger than others. What deep song? The voice of the mountain. The pull toward home. Some who come below feel it immediately. Others fight it for a time. She looked at Marcus, who was examining their tools with fascination. He will not want to leave soon. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cave temperature. What happened to the other people who came down here? The Hendricks family. They heard the song, but they fought it. The deep places let them go, but... She touched her temple. Fighting the song breaks something in the mind. They will never be whole again. That explained the empty look in Jim Hendricks' eyes. He'd been offered something down here and refused it, but the refusal had cost him his sanity. And if someone accepts this song, they become like us. The sun world becomes painful, too bright, too loud. But the deep places welcome them forever. I looked around at the pale people gathering near Marcus. There were so many of them, men and women, and what looked like children, though it was hard to tell their ages. All of them had that same stretched appearance, those huge eyes adapted for darkness. How many people live down here? In all the deep places? Hundreds, maybe more. Every generation, some from the sun world find their way below. Some stay, some go. Those who stay become family. Jeremiah called to us from across the chamber. Come. The eldest wants to meet the new sunfolk. We followed them through passages that got more elaborate as we went deeper. The walls were carved with beautiful patterns, and the floors were smooth stone worn by countless feet. We passed underground pools where pale fish swam in the lamplight, and chambers where the strange white plants grew in abundance. Marcus was in heaven, asking questions about everything. How they made light without fire, how they purified water, how they reproduced and raised children. The pale people answered him patiently, and I noticed that the longer we stayed, the more comfortable he seemed in the darkness. After what felt like hours of walking, we entered a vast chamber that took my breath away. The ceiling stretched so high our lights couldn't reach it, and the walls were covered in carvings that told the entire history of the underground people. At the center of space sat the oldest person I'd ever seen. The eldest was ancient beyond measure, with skin like old paper and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through stone. "Surface dwellers," she said, "you have found our hidden realm." "We're sorry for intruding," I said. "We were just exploring." "No apology needed, child. The deep places call who they will." She looked at Marcus with those ancient eyes. "You hear it strongly. The song of home." Marcus nodded, and I was alarmed to see tears in his eyes. "I've never felt anything like it. It's like I've been looking for this place my whole life." "Many feel so. The surface world is hard and bright and full of noise. The deep places offer peace." "What about the surface people who are looking for us?" I asked. "Our jobs, our lives up there." The eldest smiled sadly. "Surface lives fade like morning mist, but what is built in the deep places lasts forever." That's when I realized this wasn't just a discovery or an anthropological find. This was a choice. Stay and become like them, or leave and spend the rest of my life knowing what I'd walked away from. "Rebecca," Marcus said, "imagine what we could learn here. Think about the research possibilities." But I was thinking about something else. If the Pale People had been taking lost cavers and miners for over 70 years, why had no one ever found evidence of them before? How had they stayed hidden for so long? "You've been influencing things on the surface," I said to the eldest, "making sure caves get closed off, making sure people don't dig too deep. We protect ourselves, yes, but we take no one by force. Those who stay choose to stay. And those who choose to leave? Leave changed. The deep song stays with them always, calling them home." I looked at Marcus and saw that his skin already seemed paler in the lamplight. His eyes had grown wider, more sensitive to our lights. The change was starting. "How long do we have to decide?" I asked. "The deep places are patient," the eldest said, "but the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. The sun world grows painful, and the call of home grows stronger." As if to prove her point, one of the Pale People brought us food, strange white fruits that tasted better than anything I'd ever eaten, and water that seemed to wash away all my surface worries. With each bite, the cave felt more like home, and the outside world felt more like a half-remembered dream. "Rebecca," Marcus said, his voice dreamy, "what if this is where we're supposed to be?" And looking around at the peaceful faces of the Pale People, listening to their quiet songs echoing through the chambers, I almost believed he was right. Almost. I don't know how long we stayed in that deep chamber. Time moved differently there, flowing like water with no beginning or end. Marcus spent hours talking with the Pale People, learning their history, their customs, their way of life. With each conversation, he seemed to sink deeper into their world. But I couldn't stop thinking about the surface, about the rangers who would be looking for us soon, about the implications of what we'd found. "Eldest," I said during a quiet moment, "what happens when the surface world finds out about you? When development comes to these mountains?" Her ancient face grew sad. "The sun folk bring poison water and loud machines. They break the deep places without understanding what they destroy. But if people knew you were here, they could protect your territory. Sun folk protect nothing they cannot own or understand. They would put us in bright boxes and study us like insects." I realized she was probably right. The government would want to study the Pale People, and developers would see the caves as obstacles to profit. There was no easy way to protect this hidden civilization. "Marcus," I said, "we need to think about this carefully. We can't just disappear. People are depending on us." But Marcus looked at me with those dilated pupils and smiled. "What people, Rebecca? What are we really going back to? Jobs that stress us out? A world that's destroying itself? Look, around you. These people have found peace. They've also given up sunlight, fresh air, the surface world, and gained immortality, community, purpose. He gestured to the pale people around us. They've transcended what we are. That's when I knew I was losing him. The eldest watched our conversation with knowing eyes. The deep song affects each person differently. Some, like your friend, hear the call of home immediately. Others, like you, cling to the surface world. What if I don't want to choose right now? The choice makes itself, given time. The longer you stay, the more painful the surface becomes. Eventually, returning above ground would kill you. A chill ran through me. You're saying we're trapped. You are transforming. The deep places change all who linger, preparing them for life eternal underground. I looked at my hands and saw that my skin was indeed paler than before. My eyes felt more sensitive to light, and the surface world seemed like a distant memory. How long had we been down here? Days? Weeks? I need to go back, I said suddenly. I need to report in or people will come looking for us. Marcus grabbed my arm. Rebecca, don't you feel it? The peace here, the sense of belonging. This is where we're meant to be. But his grip felt different, stronger, and his fingers seemed longer than they should be. The transformation was accelerating. I'm going back, I said firmly. You can come with me or stay, but I'm not abandoning the surface world. The eldest nodded slowly. If you must go, go now. Wait much longer, and the choice will be gone. Marcus looked stricken. You can't leave. Not when we've found this. Rebecca, please. I looked around at the pale people, at their peaceful faces, and their timeless chamber. Part of me wanted to stay, to let the transformation complete itself and live forever in this quiet underground paradise. But a bigger part of me knew that I belonged in the sunlight. I'm sorry, I said to Marcus. I can't do this. I gathered my equipment and started toward the passage that would lead me back to the surface. Behind me, I could hear Marcus pleading with the eldest, asking if there was a way for people to move between both worlds. The deep places and the sun world cannot mix, she said gently. To belong to one is to be lost to the other. I was almost to the tunnel when Marcus caught up with me, but something was wrong with his movement. He flowed like the pale people now, and his eyes had grown so large they dominated his face. You can't leave, he said, and his voice had an echo to it that hadn't been there before. The deep places have claimed you too. Marcus, you're scaring me. I'm trying to save you. He stepped between me and the tunnel. If you go back now, you'll be like the Hendricks family. Broken, lost between two worlds. That's my choice to make. No. His transformed face was sad, but determined. I can't let you destroy yourself. He lunged toward me, moving with inhuman speed. I dodged and ran for the tunnel, but he was faster now, adapted for the underground environment. He caught me at the tunnel entrance and we struggled, but his strength was far beyond what it should have been. Let me go, I shouted. I can't, he said, and I could hear the real Marcus underneath the transformation, scared and desperate. Rebecca, please, just stay. Let the change finish. We can be happy here. But I couldn't stay. I pulled my emergency flare from my pack and triggered it. The bright red light exploded through the chamber, and the pale people cried out in pain, covering their enormous eyes. Marcus released me, stumbling backward and screaming as the harsh light hit his adapted vision. I ran. Behind me I could hear the eldest calling out, her voice echoing through the tunnels. Let her go. The surface world calls her too strongly. But I could also hear Marcus pursuing me, and he knew these tunnels now as well as the pale people did. I fumbled. Through passage after passage, following my rope back toward the surface, while behind me I could hear him calling my name. Rebecca, come back! You're making a mistake! His voice was getting fainter, and I realized the harsh light from my flare had probably done permanent damage to his adapted eyes. I felt sick about hurting him, but I couldn't stop running. It took me 6 hours to reach the surface, and by the time I emerged from the cave, the sun was setting. The light was almost unbearable. My eyes had adapted to darkness more than I'd realized, but the fresh air and the open sky felt like freedom. I radioed for backup and told them Dr. Deepwell had been injured in a cave-in. It was the only story that made sense, the only way to protect the Pale people and explain Marcus's disappearance. But as I sat in the ranger station, filling out reports and answering questions, I could feel the deep song still calling to me. The underground had left its mark, and I knew it always would. The search team spent 3 weeks looking for Marcus. I led them to every part of the cave system except the passages that led to the Pale people. I told them about collapses and unstable rocks, and eventually they declared him lost and presumed dead. The official report said Dr. Marcus Deepwell had fallen into an unmapped sinkhole during geological research. His body was never recovered. Case closed. But I knew the truth. Somewhere deep below the mountains, Marcus was living with the Hollow Folk, adapted to eternal darkness, transformed into something that was no longer quite human. And part of him was probably happy there. The hardest part was dealing with the changes in myself. My eyes remained sensitive to bright light, and I found myself drawn to dark, quiet places. Sometimes at night, I could swear I heard singing coming from deep underground, the same haunting melodies I'd heard in the Pale people's chambers. I requested a transfer to a different part of the forest, somewhere far from the cave systems. But even there, I felt the pull of the deep places. I would dream about walking through smooth-walled tunnels, about the peaceful faces of the Hollow Folk, about the eldest with her ancient wisdom. 6 months after Marcus disappeared, I made a decision that would change everything. I began working with environmental groups to protect the water table around the cave systems. If development came to the mountains, if mining companies started digging deep, they would destroy the hidden civilization below. I couldn't let that happen. I used my position as a ranger to classify large areas as geologically unstable. I worked with hydrologists to establish protected watersheds. Slowly, carefully, I built a barrier of bureaucracy around the deep places. And sometimes, when the moon was dark and the forest was quiet, I would return to the cave entrance. Not to go down. I was afraid of what would happen if I spent too much time underground again. But I would sit at the mouth of the cave and listen. The Hollow Folk would leave me messages, carved symbols on rocks near the entrance, arrangements of stones that told me they were safe, that their world continued undisturbed. And once, I found a letter written on paper made from their white plants in Marcus's handwriting. "Rebecca," it said, "I am more myself now than I ever was on the surface. The deep places have given me purpose and peace. Don't grieve for me, but please, keep protecting our home." I burned the letter after reading it, but I kept his request. It's been 5 years now since I discovered the Hollow Folk. The protected areas I helped establish have held firm against development pressure. The caves remain officially closed due to geological instability, and the deep places stay hidden. But I know they're there. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, living their quiet lives in the eternal darkness below our feet. People who chose the peace of the underground over the chaos of the surface world. People who found a different way to be human. Sometimes hikers report hearing singing from deep in the mountains or finding strange symbols carved on rocks. The local people just nod and say it's the old mountain spirits, the same stories their grandparents told. They don't know how close to the truth they are. I keep watching over them, the Hollow Folk and the surface world above them. I've become a guardian of the boundary between two worlds, making sure that neither discovers the other until we're all ready for what that might mean. And late at night, when the forest is quiet and the stars are bright overhead, I still hear the deep song calling to me. The voice of the mountain, inviting me home to the peaceful darkness below. Someday, when I'm old and tired of the surface world's noise and chaos, I might answer that call. I might walk down into the smooth-walled passages and let the transformation complete itself, becoming one of the Hollow Folk who guard the deep places. But for now, I have work to do up here in the sunlight. The hidden civilization below depends on someone who understands both worlds, someone who can protect their secret while living in ours. My name is Rebecca Stormridge, and I am the keeper of the Hollow Folks' secret. And someday, that secret might be the most important thing humanity has left. My name is Michael Ravenshollow, and I've been a ranger at Allegheny National Forest for 13 years. People always ask about my last name. Sounds made up, right? But it's real, been in my family for generations. My dad used to joke that it meant we were destined to live in dark places. He wasn't wrong. I'm 37 now, been working these Pennsylvania mountains since I got out of the Army. Before this job, I spent 8 years as a military engineer, building bridges and blowing things up when they needed to come down. The skills translate well to forest work, fixing trails, assessing rock slides, making sure the hiking paths are safe. November in the mountains is my favorite time. The tourists are gone, the leaves have fallen, and you can actually hear yourself think. The air gets crisp and clean, and everything feels peaceful. At least it used to. The weird reports started coming in around the second week of November 1985. Hikers calling the ranger station, saying they'd gotten lost on trails they'd walked dozens of times before. Not just confused, completely turned around like the paths had changed while they were walking them. It was the strangest thing, said Mrs. Patterson, a regular who hiked the Hearts Content Trail every weekend. She was sitting in my office, still shaky from her experience. I know that trail like my own backyard, but yesterday I kept hearing this music, like singing but not quite. It seemed to come from the rocks themselves. I gave her coffee and listened politely. Mrs. Patterson was 73 and sharp as a tack. If she said something weird happened, something weird happened. But singing rocks? Come on. The sound made my head feel fuzzy, she continued, like when you stand up too fast. I followed it for maybe an hour before I realized I was walking in circles. Found myself at the same boulder 3 times. After Shaw left, I radioed my supervisor. Tom, I'm getting more reports about hikers getting disoriented on the Hearts Content Trail. Maybe we should check for gas leaks or something. Tom's voice crackled back through the radio. Gas leaks in the middle of the forest, Mike? You feeling okay? Just saying. People don't usually get lost on marked trails. Check it out tomorrow. Probably just early winter messing with people's heads. But I had a feeling it wasn't that simple. In 13 years of ranger work, you develop instincts about when something's really wrong. The forest talks to you if you know how to listen. And lately, it had been saying things I didn't like. That night, I couldn't sleep. My cabin sits about 2 miles from the Hearts Content area, close enough that I can hear cars on the main trail during busy seasons. But that night, I heard something else. Faint, like music played underwater. It seemed to come from the direction of the old stone formations. I told myself it was wind through the limestone caves. Had to be. I'd grown up in these mountains, spent my whole adult life here. There was always a rational explanation for everything. Always. The next morning, I packed my surveying gear and headed out to Heart's Content. The trail looked normal, well marked, properly maintained, no obvious hazards. But something felt off. The birds were too quiet. No squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the insects seemed to have gone somewhere else. About half a mile in, I found the first sign that Mrs. Patterson wasn't imagining things. Boot prints in the soft earth, circling the same large boulder over and over. The prints were definitely hers. I recognized the tread pattern from her hiking boots. But why would someone walk in circles around a rock for an hour? I knelt down to examine the boulder more closely. It was ordinary Pennsylvania sandstone, probably been sitting there for thousands of years. But when I put my hand on it, I felt something strange, a tiny vibration, so faint I almost missed it, like the rock was humming. I pulled out my equipment and took some readings. The electromagnetic levels were normal, temperature was normal. But when I used my sound meter, I got something interesting. The rock was producing sound. Not loud enough for most people to hear, but definitely there. A low, frequency hum right at the edge of human hearing. Huh, I said out loud. My voice echoed strangely in the quiet forest. That's when I noticed the other hikers. They were standing about 50 yards away, near another rock formation. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all wearing bright hiking gear. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing the rocks like they were watching a movie screen. "Hey!" I called out. "You folks okay?" No response. I walked toward them, calling out again. "Excuse me, park ranger." As I got closer, I could see their faces. Their eyes were open, but they weren't blinking. Their mouths hung slightly open. They looked like they were listening to something fascinating. "Sir? Ma'am?" I touched the nearest man's shoulder. He didn't react. His skin was cold, even through his jacket. I checked his pulse, slow but steady. Same with the other 2. They were alive, but it was like their minds had gone somewhere else. I radioed for backup and medical assistance, then tried to figure out what had happened. The 3 hikers were standing in front of a cluster of large stones that formed a natural semicircle. The rocks were covered in what looked like old carvings, symbols and patterns I didn't recognize. I'd been past this spot hundreds of times and never noticed the carvings before. How was that possible? I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. Through the lens, the carvings looked different somehow, clearer, like they were glowing slightly. I lowered the camera and looked again with my naked eyes. Just ordinary scratches in old stone. The sound meter in my pack started beeping. I pulled its T out and checked the reading. The area around the stone circle was producing the same low-frequency hum as the first boulder, but stronger, much stronger. The 3 hikers suddenly blinked and looked around, confused. "Where are we?" asked the woman. We were on the main trail." "How long have we been standing here?" asked one of the men, checking his watch. "It was noon when we stopped to look at these rocks. Now it's almost 3 o'clock. I helped them back to the main trail and made sure they got safely to their car. They couldn't remember anything about the past 3 hours. The last thing they recalled was hearing beautiful music coming from the stone formation. After they left, I went back to examine the area more carefully. The carvings were definitely old, probably Native American based on the style. But some of them looked fresh, like they'd been carved recently. How could that be? I was so focused on the stones that I almost missed the footprints leading away from the circle. Human footprints. But something was wrong with them. They were too deep, like whoever made them weighed much more than they should have, and they led directly toward a sheer rock face that should have been impossible to climb. At the base of the rock face, the footprints just stopped. My radio crackled. "Mike, you copy? Medical team is en route to your location." "Cancel that," I replied. "The hikers are fine, but I need a geology expert out here. Something strange is going on with the rock formations." "Strange how?" I looked at the stone circle, then at the impossible footprints, then at the cliff where the trail seemed to end. "I'm not sure yet, but we might need to close this section of trail until we figure it out." That night, I called my friend Dr. Lisa Bedrock at Penn State. Lisa specialized in geological acoustics, the study of how sound moves through rock and earth. If anyone could explain what was happening to the stones, it would be her. "Rocks don't sing, Mike," she said when I described what I'd found. "But they can resonate under certain conditions. Limestone caves, for example, can amplify and distort sound in interesting ways." "This isn't limestone," I told her. It's sandstone. And the sound seems to be coming from the rocks themselves." "Impossible, unless—" She paused. "There are some theoretical models about crystalline structures in rock that might produce harmonic frequencies under seismic stress, but we're talking about very specific conditions. Could you come take a look? I'll pay your consulting fee." "You're serious about this, aren't you?" I thought about the 3 hikers standing like statues for 3 hours, about the footprints that led nowhere, about Mrs. Patterson walking in circles around a humming boulder. "Yeah," I said. "I'm serious." Lisa agreed to drive up the next morning with her equipment. I spent the rest of the evening researching the history of the Heart's content area. What I found in the old mining records made my blood run cold. In 1934, a small mining operation had worked the area where the stone circle now stood. According to the records, 3 miners had disappeared underground. The official report blamed a cave-in, but there were witness statements that told a different story. The rocks started singing, one surviving miner had written. Beautiful songs, like angels. Tommy and Joe went toward the sound, said they had to see what was making such music. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. The mine had been permanently sealed after that incident. But according to my maps, the stone circle sat right over where the mine entrance used to be. I found my grandfather's journal in my parents' old trunk that night. Grandpa had worked those same mines in the 1930s. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were clear. November 15th, 1934. The stones are talking again. Heard them singing all night. Mary thinks I'm going crazy, but I know what I heard. Sing the songs of the people who got lost down there. Tommy's voice, Joe's voice, and something else, something old that was waiting for them. Lisa arrived the next morning with a truck full of scientific equipment. She was a small woman with gray hair and intense eyes, the kind of person who could make rocks tell their secrets. "Show me these singing stones," she said. We hiked out to the stone circle together. In daylight, the carvings looked even stranger. Some of them seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. "Interesting," Lisa said, running her hands over the stone surface. "These formations aren't natural. Someone arranged them this way, probably centuries ago." She set up her equipment and started taking readings. The results made her frown. "Mike, this is impossible. These rocks are producing acoustic frequencies that shouldn't exist in this type of stone. It's like they're amplifying something." "Amplifying what?" "I don't know. But the sound is definitely coming from underground, deep underground." As we worked, more hikers started arriving. Word had gotten out about the musical rocks, and people were curious. I tried to keep them away from the stone circle, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. A family from Pittsburgh, Mom, Dad, and 2 kids, wandered too close to the formation. Within minutes, they were standing motionless, staring at the stones with blank expressions. "Not again," I muttered, moving toward them. But this time was different. As I approached the family, I started to hear it too. The singing. It was beautiful, like a choir of voices harmonizing in perfect pitch. The sound seemed to come from inside my head and outside at the same time. Lisa grabbed my arm. "Mike, don't go any closer." Her voice snapped me out of it. The family was still entranced, but I could think clearly again. "What the hell was that?" I asked. "The acoustic frequency. It's affecting brainwave patterns, creating a hypnotic state." We managed to wake up the family and get them safely away from the area, but more people kept coming. By afternoon, I had to radio for help blocking the trail. That's when we found the first body. It was hidden in a small cave about 100 yards from the stone circle. The body looked like it had been there for decades, but it was perfectly preserved. The man was wearing mining clothes from the 1930s. A metal tag on his shirt read Tommy Morrison. "This should be just bones by now," Lisa said, kneeling beside the body. "But look at this." She was right. Tommy Morrison looked like he'd died yesterday, not 50 years ago. His skin had a strange grayish color, almost like stone. "Lisa," I said quietly, "touch his hand." She did, then jerked back. "It's hard, like granite." We found Joe's body in another cave, in the same condition. Perfectly preserved, but transformed into something that was part human, part stone. Lisa's equipment was going crazy. The acoustic readings were off the charts. "Mike, we need to evacuate this entire area, now. Something is waking up down there." But it was too late. As the sun went down, the singing got louder, and this time it wasn't just coming from the stones. It was coming from Tommy and Joe. The voices of the dead miners mixed with something else, something that sounded ancient and hungry. Lisa's equipment showed that the sound was coming from deep underground, probably from the old mine tunnels. "They're not really dead," Lisa said, checking her readings. "The acoustic signature suggests consciousness trapped in mineral matrix. Their minds are still active, but their bodies have been transformed." More people arrived, despite our efforts to block the trail. A group of college students, an elderly couple, 3 guys from the local hunting club. all drawn by rumors of the musical stones. I tried to turn them away, but the singing was getting stronger. Soon, even Lisa and I were having trouble thinking clearly. "We have to stop this," I said, "before more people get hurt." Lisa was studying the stone circle with new equipment. "Mike, these aren't just random rocks. They're positioned to focus and amplify acoustic energy from underground. Someone built this on purpose." "Who would do that?" "Maybe someone trying to contain whatever's down there. Or maybe someone trying to free it." The singing reached a new pitch, and suddenly the ground began to shake. Small stones rolled down the hillside. Tree branches swayed without any wind. "Earthquake?" I asked. "No. Something's moving underground. Something big." That's when they appeared. The miners emerged from cracks in the stone circle. Not just Tommy and Joe, but others. Dozens of them, all wearing clothes from different time periods. All transformed into living stone. Their eyes glowed with a soft gray light. When they spoke, their voices harmonized with the underground singing. "Join us," they said in unison. "The stones remember everything. Every thought, every memory, every moment of life. We can preserve you forever." Lisa stepped forward. "What are you?" "We are the stone singers," they replied. "We are the memory of the earth. We have watched mountains rise and fall. We have seen the birth and death of ages, and we offer you immortality." One of the stone figures looked directly at me. It was my grandfather. "Michael," he said in a voice like grinding rock, "I've been waiting for you. The family gift runs strong in your blood. You can hear the songs better than most." "Grandpa? But you died when I was 12. I never left. I came back to the stones when my body grew old. Now I am part of something greater." The other stone figures began to move closer. Behind them, more shapes emerged from the ground. Hikers who had disappeared over the years, all transformed into living stone. "The mountain is dying," my grandfather explained. "Human activity has weakened the old foundations. Soon there will be a great earthquake. Many will die, but we can save the worthy ones. We can preserve their consciousness in stone, safe forever." Lisa was backing away, her equipment in hand. "Mike, they're telling the truth about the earthquake. My readings show massive instability in the rock layers. This whole area could collapse." The stone singers moved closer. "Choose now," they said. "Join us willingly and keep your memories, your personality. Refuse, and be lost when the mountain falls." I looked at my grandfather's stone face. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to join the ancient consciousness that lived in the rock. But I remembered Mrs. Patterson's fear, the blank expressions on the faces of the entranced hikers, the way the stone singers moved, not like living beings, but like puppets controlled by something else. "What really happened to the miners?" I asked. My grandfather's expression didn't change. "They heard the songs. They came to us willingly." That's not what the records say. For the first time, the stone singers looked uncertain. "The records were written by those who did not understand," they said. I pulled out my grandfather's journal and read aloud. "The stones are talking again. Heard them singing all night. Mary thinks I'm going crazy, but I know what I heard." The stone figures began to move faster, surrounding Lisa and me. "You came to the stones because you were dying," I continued. "You chose transformation over death. But what about the others? What about the hikers who just got lost?" The singing underground grew louder, more insistent. "All consciousness belongs to the stones eventually," the singers replied. "We simply speed the process." That's when I knew we had to fight. I still had my military demolition training, and I'd noticed something about the stone circle. The rocks weren't just arranged randomly, they formed a precise acoustic amplifier like a giant speaker system pointing underground. "Lisa," I shouted over the singing, "if I disrupt the stone circle, will that stop the acoustic effect?" "Maybe, but the ground instability is real. Any explosion could trigger the earthquake." The stone singers were almost on us. I could see more emerging from the ground, including recent hikers I recognized. I made the hardest decision of my life. I pulled out the emergency charges I always carried for trail maintenance, small explosives used to clear rock slides. If I placed them correctly at the base of the keystones, I could collapse the whole formation. "Get back to the truck," I told Lisa. "I'm not leaving you. Someone needs to warn people about the earthquake." The stone singers reached for us with hands that could crush steel. I dodged between them, placing charges at the base of the 3 largest stones in the circle. My grandfather's stone face turned toward me. "Michael, don't. You'll destroy us all. Maybe that's better than what you've become." I hit the detonator. The explosion was smaller than I'd hoped, but it was enough. The carefully balanced stone circle collapsed, and the harmonic resonance that had amplified the underground singing was broken. The stone singers stopped moving. Their glowing eyes went dark. They stood like statues for a moment, then crumbled to dust. But my grandfather was right about one thing. The mountain was unstable. The explosion triggered a small earthquake, just big enough to seal the old mine tunnels permanently. Lisa found me 3 hours later, trapped under fallen rocks, but alive. She'd called in the earthquake as a natural disaster. The official report blamed the strange incidents on acoustic hallucinations caused by seismic activity. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When I got out, the heart's content area had been declared geologically unstable and closed to the public. No one would ever again be trapped by the singing stones. But sometimes, tonight in my cabin, I still hear them. Faint voices calling from deep underground, singing songs of preservation and memory. The consciousness trapped in stone doesn't give up easily. Requested a transfer to a different forest, someplace with stable geology and quiet rocks. But I keep my demolition equipment handy, just in case. Because I learned something important during those terrible days in November 1985. The earth remembers everything. Every life, every death, every moment of consciousness that has ever touched stone. And sometimes, that memory gets hungry for more. The heart's content area remains closed today. The official reason is seismic instability. But if you know where to look in the geological survey reports, you'll find a note about anomalous acoustic phenomena requiring further study. They're still down there, waiting. The stone singers and their promise of eternal preservation. And every November, when the tourists are gone and the mountains grow quiet, I listen to the rocks around my new ranger station, just to make sure they're not starting to sing. My name is Daniel Blood Mountain, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I know these mountains like my own heartbeat. Every trail, every creek, every old tree in the Cherokee National Forest. My grandfather used to say the mountains hold memories in their roots. I never believed him until April of 1976, when the trees started bleeding. It began with a call on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the phone rang. A hiker had found something strange near Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. "You need to see this," the hiker said, his voice shaky. "There's blood coming out of the trees." I thought he meant sap. Red sap isn't uncommon in spring. But when I drove out to the old growth section, I knew something was wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed afraid to move through the branches. The hiker, a man named Peterson, met me at the trailhead. His face was pale and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "It's about a mile in," he said, "near the big poplar grove." I followed him down the familiar trail. The path looked normal, but the smell hit me first. Sweet and metallic, like pennies left in the rain. As we got deeper, I noticed the animals. 3 deer hung from tree branches, 20 feet off the ground. They looked like they'd been drained dry. No blood on the ground. No wounds I could see. "How did they get up there?" Peterson whispered. I didn't have an answer. Bears can't climb that high with a full-grown deer. And why would they hang them like that? Then I saw the trees Peterson had called about. 5 massive tulip poplars, each one weeping red from their bark. I touched one of the streaks with my finger. It was warm, fresh. and it smelled like iron. "Stay back," I told Peterson. I radioed for backup and took samples. The red stuff looked like sap, but it was too thin, too dark. Tonight, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's stories. He used to tell me about the old days when Cherokee warriors would disappear in certain parts of the forest. Places where the ground was hungry, he called it. The lab results came back the next morning. I stared at the paper, reading it 3 times before I believed it. The red sap contained human blood. Type O positive. But the trees were healthy. No disease, no parasites, nothing that should make them bleed. I called Dr. Sarah Fernleaf, a botanist from the university. She specialized in unusual plant behavior. If anyone could explain this, it would be her. "Trees don't bleed," she said when I told her over the phone. "These do," I said, "and it's human blood." Sarah arrived that afternoon with a truck full of equipment. She was a small woman with gray hair and quick hands. She'd spent 30 years studying plants, and nothing surprised her anymore, or so she thought. We hiked back to the grove together. The deer were still hanging there 3 days later. No smell of rot, no flies, just empty husks swaying in the breeze. Sarah took one look at the bleeding trees and went quiet for a long time. "The bark isn't damaged," she finally said. "There's no external wound. The blood is coming from inside the tree." She took core samples while I checked the area. The ground around the trees was strange. Too soft, too dark, like soil that had been fed too well. "Daniel," Sarah called. She was holding a soil sample, her face pale. "Look at this." The dirt in her hands was rich and red, almost black. When she squeezed it, drops of liquid came out, red liquid. "The whole root system is saturated," she said. "It's like the trees are drinking it." That's when we heard the sound, a soft rustling above us. Though there was no wind, the hanging deer had started to turn, slow and steady, like they were on invisible strings. We left fast after that. 3 days later, we found the maintenance crew. I got the call at dawn. 3 park workers had gone missing during their weekly trail check. Their truck was found parked at the Joyce Kilmer entrance, keys still in the ignition. Sarah met me at the scene. She'd been running tests on her samples, and the results had her spooked. "The trees are growing," she said as we walked the trail. "Fast. I took measurements 3 days ago. They've gained 6 inches in diameter. That's impossible. Tell that to the trees." We found the first body hanging from a massive oak 40 feet up. Jimmy Martinez, one of our best workers. He looked like the deer, empty, drained, but there wasn't a mark on him. The second worker, Bob Chen, was wrapped in the roots of a hickory tree. The roots had grown up around him like a cage. He was still alive when we found him, but barely. "The trees," he whispered. "They grabbed me. They moved." Bob died before the ambulance reached the hospital. We never found the third worker, Tom Bradley. Just his hard hat and a trail of deep gouges in the earth, like something had dragged him underground. Sarah was taking pictures when I noticed the blood trees had spread. 7 now, instead of 5. All of them weeping that red sap. The smell was stronger too, sweet and rotten at the same time. "Look at this," Sarah said. She was kneeling by the base of one of the new bleeding trees. The roots were visible above ground, twisted and thick. They pulsed like veins. "It's moving," I said. The root shifted slightly, then went still. But we both saw it. Sarah's equipment started beeping. Her soil tester was going crazy, needles jumping all over the place. "The iron content is off the charts," she said. "And there's something else. The pH is wrong. This soil is alive, Daniel. It's processing something." That night, I called my grandfather. He was 83 and lived in a cabin near the Oconaluftee River. He listened to my story without interrupting. "You found the hungry place," he said when I finished. "What hungry place?" "Your great-great-grandfather told me. There was a battle there long ago. Cherokee and white soldiers. So much blood spilled that the ground drank it down. The trees learned to like the taste." "That's just a story, grandfather." "Is it?" You've seen the trees move. You've seen them feed. Some things don't die, Daniel. They just sleep until they get hungry again. He told me about the old ways, how the Cherokee used to keep certain places quiet with ceremonies and offerings, how some hungers could never be fully satisfied, only managed. You need to stop feeding it, he said, or it'll never stop growing. But it was too late for that. The next morning, Sarah called me from the hospital. She'd collapsed during the night. Severe anemia. The doctor said she'd lost almost half her blood, but there were no wounds, no explanation. I have to go back, she told me, lying pale in the hospital bed. I need to understand what's happening. No, you need to rest. It's in my dreams, Daniel. The forest, it's calling me. I knew that feeling, the pull of the hungry place. Even now, sitting in that sterile hospital room, I could feel it tugging at me, like a fishhook in my chest, drawing me back to the bleeding trees. That afternoon, another botanist arrived from the university. Dr. James Mosswood had come to help Sarah with her research. He was young and eager, full of theories about plant mutation and environmental factors. I tried to warn him, told him to stay away from the grove, but he laughed it off. Trees don't hunt, Ranger Blood Mountain. They're not predators. He went into the forest alone that evening, carrying his equipment and his certainty. We found him the next morning, hanging upside down from the biggest tulip poplar, completely bloodless. His equipment was arranged in a perfect circle around the base of the tree, like an offering. The grove had spread. Again. Now it covered almost an acre, and the trees in the center were massive. Ancient-looking, even though I knew they'd been normal size a week ago. Sarah checked herself out of the hospital against doctor's orders. She was weak, pale as paper, but determined. It's accelerating, she said, looking at the expanded grove. The growth rate is exponential now. She set up instruments to monitor the trees, seismic sensors to detect movement, cameras to record what happened at night. But the equipment kept failing. Batteries drained in hours. Memory cards corrupted. Like the forest was fighting back against observation. The trees started moving at night. I saw it myself during a late patrol. The bleeding trees would shift and sway, even when there was no wind. Their branches reached out like arms, testing the air. The roots pushed up through the ground, creating new paths and blocking old ones. By day, they looked normal again, just trees. But the forest around them was changing. Dead zones where nothing grew, streams that ran red, and more bodies. A family of hikers disappeared on Saturday. We found their car at the trailhead, doors open, engines still running. The trail cameras showed them entering the forest, but they never came out. We organized search parties, but the volunteers kept getting lost. Trails that had been there for decades suddenly led nowhere. New paths appeared overnight, all of them leading toward the hungry grove. I found pieces of the family scattered through the forest. A child's shoe hanging from a branch, a woman's jacket wrapped around a tree trunk. But no bodies. The grove was getting more efficient at cleaning up after itself. Sarah was getting worse. She'd lost more weight and her skin had a gray tint, but she wouldn't leave the research site. I can hear them, she told me one evening as we watched the trees from a safe distance. Voices in the wind. They're talking. Who's talking? The soldiers. Cherokee and Confederate. They're still fighting, Daniel, still dying. And the trees remember every drop of blood. She'd been reading about the history of the area. There had been a battle here during the Civil War. A Cherokee scouting party had ambushed a Confederate patrol. Both sides had been wiped out. The blood had soaked into the ground and never dried. It's not just feeding, Sarah continued. It's recreating. The grove is trying to bring the battle back, to make it happen again and again, so it can feed forever. That night, the trees made their first coordinated attack. 5 park rangers had come to help with the search efforts. Good men, experienced in these mountains. They set up camp a half-mile from the grove, thinking they were safe. I woke to screaming. By the time I reached their camp, it was over. The trees had moved during the night. Where the camp had been, there was now a circle of bleeding poplars. The rangers' equipment was scattered around, but the men were gone. I found their bodies the next morning, hanging from branches like fruit, all of them drained. But these trees were different from the others, younger, smaller. Like the grove was spreading by converting normal trees into hungry ones. Sarah was there when I found them. She looked terrible, barely able to stand. "It's learning," she whispered. "Adapting. The infection is spreading through the root system." She showed me her latest readings. The underground root network now covered 5 square miles. Every tree connected to every other tree. One massive organism, all of it hungry. "We have to evacuate the area," I said. "It won't matter. It'll just follow the food." She was right. The grove wasn't confined to one location anymore. It was mobile, growing, and it was getting smarter. That night, the trees tried to take me. I was sleeping in my cabin when I heard the scratching. Roots were pushing up through my floorboards, feeling around like blind fingers. I grabbed my axe and started chopping, but for every root I cut, 2 more appeared. The walls of my cabin started to bulge inward. Tree branches pressed against the windows. I could hear the wood groaning as the forest tried to squeeze me out, like toothpaste from a tube. I barely escaped through the back door. My truck was covered in vines, but the engine started. I drove away as my cabin collapsed behind me, crushed by trees that had grown 50 feet in 10 minutes. The grove had marked me. I could feel it in my blood, a constant pull toward the hungry place. It knew my scent now, my taste, and it wanted more. Sarah was waiting for me at the ranger station. She looked like a ghost, all pale skin and dark circles. "It spoke to me," she said. "The grove. It offered me a deal." "What kind of deal?" "My blood for yours. One life to save many." I could see the temptation in her eyes. The grove had been feeding on her slowly, draining her bit by bit. But it wanted something bigger, something final. "It needs a willing sacrifice," she continued. "Someone who chooses to feed it. That would give it enough power to spread beyond the mountains. You're not doing it. What if it's the only way to stop it?" But I knew better. Feeding the grove wouldn't stop it. It would only make it stronger. My grandfather's stories were clear about that. Some hungers can never be satisfied. The grove revealed its true nature on the night of the blood moon. Sarah and I returned to the forest one last time. She was dying anyway, the slow drain taking its toll. If we were going to stop this thing, it had to be now. The grove had grown massive, 30-foot trees where there had been saplings, a canopy so thick that moonlight couldn't penetrate. And in the center, something that made my Cherokee blood run cold. The trees had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around a clearing. In that clearing, translucent figures moved back and forth, Cherokee warriors and Confederate soldiers locked in an eternal battle, ghosts fed by blood, reliving their death over and over. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. She was completely under the growth. V's influence now, her eyes reflecting the red light that pulsed from the trees. The spirits noticed us. Cherokee warriors I might have been related to, Confederate boys who died far from home, all of them trapped in the grove's hunger, forced to fight and die again every night. One of the Cherokee spirits approached me. He looked like my grandfather, but younger, stronger. "You carry the old blood," he said, his voice like wind through leaves. "Help us find peace." But the Confederate spirits disagreed. They surged forward, their anger feeding the tree's hunger. "More blood," they demanded. "More death. Feed the earth with your life." The trees began to move, massive trunks shifting position, branches reaching down like grasping hands. The grove wanted its sacrifice, and it wouldn't wait much longer. Sarah stepped forward into the clearing. "Take me," she said to the spirits. "I give myself willingly." The trees shuddered with anticipation. Their roots burst from the ground, wrapping around Sarah's legs. But something was wrong. The spirits weren't satisfied. They wanted more than one sacrifice. "The old debt," the Cherokee warrior told me. "Blood for blood, both sides must pay." I understood then. The battle had never ended because neither side had been properly honored. The Cherokee dead needed burial rites. The Confederate dead needed recognition. The Grove fed on their anger and pain, keeping them trapped in an endless cycle. My grandfather had taught me the old ceremonies, songs to honor the dead, rituals to help spirits find peace, but they required sacrifice. My blood freely given to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The trees sensed my decision. They attacked all at once, branches whipping through the air, roots erupting from the ground. I dodged and rolled, making my way to the center of the clearing where Sarah was being slowly consumed. The spirits fought around us, Cherokee and Confederate, locked in their endless battle. Their rage fed the grove, made it stronger. I had to break the cycle. I pulled out my grandfather's knife and cut my palm. Blood dripped onto the ground where the original battle had been fought, where all this hunger had started. "I honor both sides," I said in Cherokee, then in English. "Rest now. The battle is over." The grove screamed, not with sound, but with a vibration that went through the earth and into my bones. The trees thrashed wildly, fighting against their own release, but the spirits were listening. The Cherokee warriors began to fade, finally allowed to rest. The Confederate soldiers stopped fighting, their anger draining away. As the spirits found peace, the grove began to die. The massive trees shrank back to normal size. The bleeding stopped. The red sap turned clear, then stopped flowing altogether. Sarah collapsed as the roots released her. I caught her, but she was too far gone. The grove had taken too much. "Did we stop it?" she whispered. "Yes," I lied. "We'd slowed it down, maybe for a generation. But the hungry place would always be there, waiting for the right conditions to wake up again." Sarah died in my arms as the sun rose over the quiet forest. The birds were singing again, the natural order restored, at least for now. I buried Sarah according to Cherokee tradition, in a place where the grove couldn't reach her. The official reports blamed a rare tree disease for the deaths, toxic sap that caused hallucinations and anemia. The Forest Service closed the area for environmental cleanup. They made me a cultural liaison after that. My job was to make sure sacred sites stayed protected, to watch for signs that the hungry place was waking up again. I built a cabin near the grove, close enough to keep watch. Every month I performed the ceremony my grandfather taught me, a small offering of blood to keep the spirits quiet, to remind them they've been honored. Some nights when the moon is red, I can still hear the echoes of that ancient battle. I see shadows moving between the trees. The grove remembers what it used to be, what it could become again. People ask me why I stay, why I don't retire and move somewhere safer, but this is my responsibility now. My grandfather's blood runs in my veins, and his stories live in my memory. The mountains need someone who understands the old hungers, someone who can recognize the signs before it's too late. The trees around the grove are growing again, slowly, carefully, but I'm watching them. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible April, I renew the compact between the living and the dead. Some things never really die. They just sleep until they get hungry again. And when they do wake up, someone needs to be there to remind them of the price of peace. My name is Daniel Blood Mountain, and I keep watch over the hungry place, because that's what the mountains demand. That's what the dead deserve, and that's what the living need, whether they know it or not. My name is Christopher Nightfall, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years now. People always ask about my last name. Yeah, it's real. And yeah, my parents had a sense of humor. But after what happened on Devil's Backbone in December of 1969, I sometimes wonder if they knew something I didn't. I work the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, up in the mountains where the air bites your lungs and the trees grow so thick you can walk 10 feet off a trail and disappear forever. Winter's my specialty. High-altitude rescue, mountain survival, getting people out when the weather turns mean. Did 2 tours in Vietnam before this, learned how to stay alive when everything wants you dead. Figured the mountains would be peaceful after all that. I was wrong. The calls started coming in the first week of December. Hikers on Devil's Backbone Ridge, all reporting the same thing. Panic attacks, sudden fear, feeling like something was watching them. These weren't city folks who spooked at owl hoots. I'm talking experienced climbers, people who'd been hiking these mountains for years. "It's like the whole mountain wants you gone," said Mrs. Henderson, a local teacher who'd been walking those trails since she was a kid. Her hands shook as she talked. Not just unfriendly, angry, like you're trespassing on something that doesn't want you there. I figured it was just winter getting to people. The mountains change when the cold comes. Sounds carry different. Shadows fall strange, and your mind starts playing tricks. But then Jerry Morrison brought in his dog. Blue was a hunting hound, trained to track anything with a heartbeat. Smart dog, brave as they come. But when Jerry tried to take him up Devil's Backbone Trail, Blue stopped dead at the trailhead, started whining, then howling, then turned around and ran back to the truck. Wouldn't go near that trail no matter what Jerry did. "Dog's been hunting these mountains for 6 years, Jerry told me. Never seen him scared of anything. But that trail, he acts like there's a grizzly bear around every tree." I should have listened to the dog. On December 10th, I decided to check it out myself. Grabbed my winter gear, heavy coat, emergency radio, flares, the works, and headed up to Devil's Backbone. It's called that because when you look at it from the valley, the ridgeline looks like a massive spine stretching across the mountain. Old-timers say it got the name because that's where the devil himself broke his back trying to climb out of hell. Local folklore. Every mountain has stories. The trail started normal enough. Fresh snow crunched under my boots and my breath made little clouds in the cold air. Pine trees stood like frozen soldiers on both sides of the path. Quiet, the way mountains get in winter when even the birds don't want to waste energy singing. But about a mile up, things felt different. The quiet got heavier. Not peaceful, heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. The temperature dropped fast, faster than it should have even with the altitude gain. And the trees. I've been in these woods for over a decade, but I swear the trees looked wrong, twisted, like they were trying to grow away from something. I found the first sign 2 miles up the trail. Dead animals. A whole circle of them. Rabbits, a fox, even a small deer, all arranged in a perfect ring around a flat piece of rock. They were frozen solid, had been for days, but they looked fresh. No scavenger marks, no decay, just frozen in place like someone had put them there and the mountain had decided to keep them. The rock in the center had marks carved into it. Not random scratches, deliberate cuts that looked almost like letters, but in no language I'd ever seen. They were filled with ice that looked black instead of clear. I radioed down to base, described what I found. Chief Holloway told me to take pictures and come back down, said it was probably kids playing pranks, maybe some kind of ritual thing, but his voice sounded tight, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I took the pictures and started heading back down. That's when I heard the wind. Except there was no wind. The trees stood perfectly still, not a branch moving, but I could hear wind blowing somewhere. Loud wind, like a storm coming in fast. It seemed to come from up ahead on the trail, from the direction of the ridge itself, but when I looked, the air was perfectly calm. I've heard artillery shells whistle overhead and machine guns rattle in the jungle. I thought I knew what fear sounded like. But standing there on that mountain trail, listening to wind that wasn't there, I felt something I'd never felt in Vietnam. I felt small. I made it back to the ranger station just as the sun went down. Showed the pictures to Chief Holloway. Told him about the sound. He looked at the photos for a long time, not saying anything. "Christopher," he finally said, "I want you to call Father Michael Crosswind down at St. Mary's. Tell him what you found up there." "A priest?" "Chief, I don't think kids arranging dead animals is exactly—" "Just call him." Holloway's voice was firm. "There's things about that mountain you don't know. Things I probably should have told you before I sent you up there alone." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that wind that wasn't there. And in my dreams, something was walking up that trail behind me, following my footprints in the snow. Father Michael Crosswind arrived at the station the next morning, and he wasn't what I expected. Young guy, maybe 30, with calloused hands and hiking boots that had seen real use. Turned out he'd been a mountain climber before he got the calling, knew these peaks better than most rangers. "Show me the pictures," he said after I explained what I'd found. I spread them out on my desk. The dead animals in their perfect circle, the carved rock, the strange ice-filled symbols. Father Michael studied them quietly, and I watched his face change. "How long have you been working this area?" he asked. 11 years, since I got out of the service. "And you've never heard the stories about Devil's Backbone?" I shrugged. "Ghost stories. Every mountain has them." Father Michael pulled a chair closer to my desk. "Christopher, I need you to understand something. I'm not here because your chief thinks you found evidence of teenage devil worship. I'm here because Devil's Backbone has been on the church's watch list for over 200 years. He opened a leather folder he'd brought with him. Inside were old papers, some so yellowed they looked like they might crumble if you breathed on them too hard. 1743, he read from the first page. Father Sebastian performs exorcism on Mountain Ridge after settler family found dead from exposure in July heat wave. 1782, Father William documents presence of ancient evil requiring annual blessing of area. 1834, 1856, 1889, 1923. Every 20 to 30 years, something happens on that ridge, something that requires the church's attention. I stared at the papers. The writing was old-fashioned, hard to read, but I could make out enough words to get the idea. Words like demonic manifestation and spiritual warfare and souls lost to darkness. "You're telling me there's really something up there?" "I'm telling you that ridge has been a problem for a very long time." Father Michael closed the folder. "And according to our records, we're overdue for another incident." We went up the mountain together that afternoon. Father Michael carried a small backpack with what he called tools of the trade. Holy water, a silver cross, a Bible bound in black leather. I brought my usual gear plus extra radio batteries and emergency flares. The trail felt different with the someone else there. Still wrong, still heavy, but having Father Michael walking behind me made it bearable. We talked as we climbed, and I found out he'd served in Vietnam too, Army, chaplain with the 173rd Airborne. "Saw plenty of real evil over there," he said. "Men doing things to other men that would make the devil proud. But this," he gestured at the trees around us, "this feels older, hungrier." We reached the spot where I'd found the dead animals. The circle was still there, but the animals were gone. Not taken by scavengers. There were no drag marks, no scattered bones. Just gone, like they'd never been there at all. The carved rock was still there, though. The strange symbols looked darker now, and the ice that filled them wasn't ice anymore. It was something black and thick, like old blood. Father Michael knelt beside the rock and pulled out his cross. The moment the silver touched the stone, we heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Screaming, not human screaming, something else, something that sounded like it was coming from deep underground. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then cut off like someone had slammed a door. "We need to leave," Father Michael said. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he put the cross back in his pack. "Now." We started back down the trail, walking fast, but not quite running. That's when we saw him. Old Tom Brewster, a local preacher who ran a small church in the valley. He was about 50 yards up the trail from us, sitting against a pine tree like he was taking a rest. But something about the way he sat looked wrong. "Tom," I called out, "you okay up there?" He didn't answer, didn't move. We got closer, and I saw why. Tom Brewster was frozen solid. Not just cold, frozen like the dead animals had been. His eyes were wide open, staring up at the ridge above us. His mouth was open too, like he'd been screaming when the cold took him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Tom was wearing a heavy winter coat, wool hat, insulated boots. He was dressed for the weather, dressed to survive. A Virginia winter. And the temperature hadn't dropped below 20 degrees all week. Father Michael checked for a pulse, even though we both knew there wouldn't be one. Tom's skin was white as snow and hard as stone. "How long would it take for a man to freeze like this?" Father Michael asked. I thought about it. In this weather? Even if he was naked, it would take hours, maybe all night. Tom Brewster left his house this morning, Father Michael said quietly. His wife called the sheriff when he didn't come home for lunch. That was 2 hours ago. We both looked at the frozen preacher, then up at the ridge above us. The wind that wasn't there started blowing again, louder this time. And in that sound, I swear, I could hear laughter. Father, I said, what exactly are we dealing with here? Father Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Something that's been waiting a very long time for the right circumstances. Something that feeds on human misery and grows stronger with each soul it claims. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Something that I'm not sure we can fight. We carried Tom Brewster's body down the mountain as the sun set behind Devil's Backbone. The whole way down, I felt like something was watching us from the ridge above. Waiting, planning. That night, my Vietnam nightmares came back for the first time in 3 years. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. 3 more people had gone missing on Devil's Backbone overnight. A family of hikers from Maryland who'd ignored the trail closure signs I'd put up after finding Tom Brewster. Father Michael and I went up with a full search team. Sheriff's deputies, volunteer firefighters, 2 other park rangers, and a tracking dog named Rex, who immediately started whining when we reached the trailhead. Maybe we should try a different approach, suggested Deputy Walsh, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Come up from the other side of the ridge. There is no other side, I told him. Ridge goes straight up for 2 miles, then drops off into a gorge. This trail is the only way up or down. We found the family's car in the parking area. Their gear was still in the trunk. Extra food, sleeping bags, emergency supplies. They'd gone up the mountain with just day packs, planning to be back before dark. We followed their tracks in the snow. 4 sets of footprints. Mom, Dad, 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12 years old. The tracks went up the trail normal enough for the first mile. Then something changed. The footprints started getting closer together, like the family had bunched up, walking right behind each other instead of spread out. Then the prints got deeper, like they were running. Then they stopped altogether. Not at a cliff or a river or any natural barrier. The footprints just ended in the middle of the trail, like 4 people had been walking through the snow and then vanished into thin air. This doesn't make sense, said Ranger Jenkins, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every kind of mountain accident you could imagine. People don't just disappear. There's always tracks, always a sign of where they went. That's when Rex, the tracking dog, found something else. He led us off the main trail, through thick pine trees and over fallen logs, to a small clearing about 100 yards from where the footprints ended. In the center of the clearing was another circle, but this one wasn't made of dead animals. This one was made of people. The missing family sat in a perfect circle, cross-legged in the snow, holding hands. They were alive. I could see them breathing. But they didn't respond when we called their names. Their eyes were open, but empty, staring at something none of us could see. Jesus Christ, whispered Deputy Walsh. Don't, Father Michael said sharply. Don't use his name here. Not like that. We tried everything. Shook them, shouted at them, even slapped the father across the face. Nothing. They just sat there in the snow, breathing slow and steady, like they were sleeping with their eyes open. We need to get them out of here, I said. Now. It took all of us to break the circle. The moment we touched them, the missing family started screaming. Not words, just screaming, like we were hurting them by moving them. But they didn't fight us, didn't try to get away. They just screamed until we got them back to the vehicles. The paramedics couldn't find anything wrong with them. Heart rate normal, blood pressure normal, no signs of hypothermia or frostbite. But their eyes stayed empty, like someone had reached inside their heads and turned off the lights. They'll come back, the doctor at the county hospital told us. Probably shock from being lost in the woods. Give them time. But Father Michael and I both knew it wasn't shock. That night I couldn't get the image out of my head. 4 people sitting in perfect circle in the snow, holding hands, staring at nothing. I called Father Michael around midnight. "It's getting stronger," he said before I could even speak. "I can feel it from here, like a storm building up on the mountain." "What does it want?" "Souls," he said simply. "It feeds on human despair, on spiritual emptiness. It corrupts people, turns them into vessels for its hunger. How do we stop it?" There was a long pause. "I don't know if we can. Christopher, I think we're dealing with something that's been sleeping for decades and now it's waking up, and when it's fully awake—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The next day brought worse news. The missing family was still alive, but they hadn't spoken a word since we'd found them. They sat in their hospital beds, staring at the wall, refusing food, refusing water. The doctors were talking about forced feeding if they didn't snap out. Of it soon. And 3 more people had gone missing on Devil's Backbone. This time it was the rescue team we'd sent up to close the trail permanently. Ranger Brooks, Deputy Martinez, and a volunteer firefighter named Pete Kowalski. All experienced mountain men who knew the dangers and how to avoid them. "I'm going up there," I told Father Michael, "with or without you." "Not alone, you're not." He was already putting on his hiking boots. "Whatever's on that mountain, it's focusing on you now. I think it wants you specifically." "Why me?" "Because you've been up there the most. Because you found the first sign. Because—" He paused, studying my face. "Because something about you appeals to it. Your guilt, maybe. Your anger." I thought about Vietnam, about the things I'd done and seen, about the nightmares that had started coming back every night since I'd first set foot on Devil's Backbone. "What if you're right?" I asked. "What if it does want me?" Father Michael picked up his pack. "Then we give it what it wants, but not in the way it expects." We climbed the mountain as the sun was setting, flashlights cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than it should be. The wind that wasn't there was howling now, so loud I had to shout for Father Michael to hear me. Halfway up the trail we found Deputy Martinez. He was hanging from a pine tree 15 feet off the ground, swaying in wind that didn't exist. No rope, no explanation for how he'd gotten up there. Just hanging by his neck from a branch that should have broken under his weight. "This is impossible," I said. Father Michael was reading from his Bible, voice steady despite everything. "Nothing's impossible here anymore. The rules are different on this mountain." That's when I heard the laughter again. Closer this time, like it was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there except pine trees and shadows. "It's playing with us," Father Michael said, "showing us what it can do, building our fear." "Is it working?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "Yes." We found Ranger Bro, Oaks, and Pete Kowalski at the top of the ridge, at a place I'd never seen before despite walking these trails for 11 years. A flat area of black rock that jutted out over the valley below like a natural altar. They were both kneeling on the rock, facing each other, holding a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Their lips were moving, but no sound came out. And their eyes were completely black, like they'd been filled with ink. "Don't touch them," Father Michael warned. "They're not really there anymore, not the parts that matter." As if they'd heard him, both men turned to look at us. When they smiled, their teeth were black too. Then they stepped off the cliff and fell into the darkness below. "My God," I whispered. "Your God?" said a voice behind us. "Your God isn't here anymore." We turned around, and for the first time, I saw the thing that had been hunting Devil's Backbone for centuries. It stood 12 feet tall, shaped like a man, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was the color of old charcoal, and its eyes burned red like coals in a forge. When it smiled, I could see teeth like broken glass. "Christopher Nightfall," it said, and its voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "I've been waiting for you." The thing that called itself the Backbone Devil looked at me like it had known me all my life. Maybe it had. "Do you know why you survived Vietnam when so many others didn't?" it asked. Do you know why you came to this mountain? Why you've stayed here for 11 years? Get behind me, Father Michael whispered, pulling out his silver cross. The metal was glowing now, actually glowing with white light that made the devil squint. Father Crosswind, the devil said, not taking its burning eyes off me. Still fighting a war you already lost. Still believing in a God who abandoned this place centuries ago. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath turn to ice crystals in the air. The black rock under our feet started making cracking sounds like it was about to split apart. You want to know the truth about this mountain, Christopher? The devil stepped closer. You want to know why people have been dying here for 300 years? Don't listen, Father Michael said, but his voice sounded weak. The cross in his hands was shaking. Your people built a church at the bottom of this ridge in 1743, the devil continued. Thought they could contain me with prayers and holy water. But I've been here since before your God had a name. I've been here since the mountains themselves were young. It gestured at the ridge around us, and I could see what it meant. The whole formation, the spine-like shape that gave Devil's Backbone its name, wasn't natural. It was like the remains of something enormous, something that had died and been buried under centuries of rock and earth. This is my prison, the devil said, built by forces older than your civilization. But prisons can be broken, Christopher, with the right key. What kind of key? I asked, even though Father Michael was grabbing my arm, trying to pull me away. A soul that understands true guilt, true despair. A soul that's already been to hell and back. The devil's smile got wider. A soul like yours. It was right, and I knew it. Vietnam had done things to me, shown me things about myself I'd never wanted to see. The night terrors, the guilt, the way I'd felt more comfortable in a war zone than I ever had in peacetime. It all made sense now. The nightmares you've been having, the devil said, they're not memories. They're previews. Show me what you did in that village outside Da Nang, Christopher. Show Father Crosswind what kind of man he's trying to save. The images hit me like a physical blow. Things I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself they'd never happened. The village, the children, the choices I'd made when the enemy was everywhere and there was no time to think. Stop, Father Michael said, but he was talking to me, not the devil. Whatever you did over there, whatever you think you did, it doesn't matter now. That's not who you are, isn't it? The devil laughed, and the sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. Tell him about the family in the hut, Christopher. Tell him about the choice you made. I fell to my knees on the black rock. The memories were too strong, too clear. The burning village, the enemy soldiers using civilians as shields, the split-second decision that had saved my squad and damned my soul. I killed them, I whispered. A whole family, to save my men. You murdered them, the devil corrected. And you've been running from that truth ever since. That's why you came to the mountains. That's why you've stayed isolated, alone, because you know what you really are. Father Michael knelt beside me, put his hand on my shoulder. Christopher, listen to me. We all carry guilt. We all make choices we regret, but that doesn't define us. Doesn't it? The devil stepped closer, and I could feel heat radiating from its skin. Your God demands perfection, Father. He demands purity. What do you think he does with souls like Christopher's? The priest's hand tightened on my shoulder. He forgives them. Then where is he now? The devil spread its arms wide, gesturing at the darkness around us. Where is your God's forgiveness on this mountain? Where is his protection for all the people who've died here? I looked up at Father Michael, saw doubt flickering in his eyes for the first time. The devil saw it too, and its smile got even wider. Ah, yes. You're starting to understand, aren't you, Father? Starting to see the truth. If God is all-powerful, why does he allow places like this to exist? Why does he allow creatures like me to hunt and kill and corrupt? Because, Father Michael started, then stopped. I could see him struggling, fighting against thoughts that had probably haunted him since seminary. Because he doesn't care. the devil finished, because he's either powerless or cruel. Either way, what kind of God is that worth? Serving! The cross in Father Michael's hands stopped glowing. The silver turned black like it was being stained from the inside. Join me, the devil said to both of us. Stop fighting a war you can't win. I can take away your guilt, Christopher. I can erase those memories, give you peace. And you, Father, I can give you certainty. No more doubt, no more questions about whether your faith means anything. For a moment, I almost said yes. The weight of what I'd done in Vietnam, the guilt I'd carried for 11 years, the idea of being free of that was almost irresistible. But then I looked at Father Michael. Really looked at him. He was scared, doubting, probably questioning everything he'd ever believed. But he was still kneeling beside me, hand on my shoulder, refusing to abandon me even when his faith was crumbling. That's when I understood something the devil couldn't. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being worthy of salvation or proving you deserved forgiveness. It was about standing with someone in the darkness, even when you couldn't see the light yourself, especially then. No, I said, getting back to my feet. You're wrong about God, and you're wrong about me. The devil's smile faded. You think your God will save you? Look around, Christopher. Look at this place. Look at what I've done to everyone who's challenged me. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, I said. But I'm not doing this for God. I'm doing it for everyone who's died on this mountain. For Tom Brewster and that family and my missing rangers. For all the people who might die if I let you get stronger. I pulled out my radio and switched to the emergency frequency. Base, this is Ranger Nightfall. I need you to contact Fort Belvoir and tell them to bring everything they've got. Full demolition team. I want enough explosives to bring down half this mountain. You can't destroy me with earthly weapons, the devil snarled. Maybe not, I said, but I can sure as hell ruin your prison. Father Michael looked at me with something like admiration. You're going to try to collapse the ridge formation, cut off whatever power source keeps you anchored here. It won't work, the devil said, but for the first time it sounded uncertain. Then you won't mind if we try. The devil's form started to change, growing larger, more terrible. Its voice became like a roaring furnace. I'll kill you both before I let you... No, Father Michael said, standing up. His cross was glowing again, brighter than before. You can't, because we're not afraid anymore. He was right. The doubt was gone from his eyes, replaced by something I'd seen in soldiers right before they charged enemy positions. Not fearlessness, courage. The decision to act in spite of fear. Christopher, he said, never taking his eyes off the devil. How long do you need? I checked my watch. Demolition team should be here in 2 hours, maybe less. Then we hold this position for 2 hours. The devil screamed, and the sound shattered the black rock under our feet. But Father Michael and I stood firm, two flawed men facing down something that had been terrorizing these mountains for centuries. We might not win. We probably wouldn't survive. But we weren't running anymore. The demolition team from Fort Belvoir arrived just as dawn was breaking over Devil's Backbone. Father Michael and I had spent the longest night of our lives holding that ridge, keeping the devil trapped in one place while it raged and threatened and tried every trick it knew to break our resolve. By the time the soldiers arrived, we were both exhausted, running on nothing but stubbornness and prayer. But we'd done it. We'd kept the creature contained. You sure about this, Ranger? Asked Sergeant Torres, the demolition specialist. We are talking about enough C4 to permanently alter the geography of this mountain. I looked at the ridge formation one last time, thinking about all the people who died here over the centuries. Do it. Father Michael and I were airlifted off the mountain before the charges went off. From the helicopter, I watched 300 years of evil get buried under 1 million tons of rock and earth. The explosion was so loud it rattled windows 30 miles away. When the dust settled, Devil's Backbone was gone. The ridge that had looked like a massive spine jutting from the mountain was now just a gentle slope covered in broken stone. The official report blamed geological instability for the collapse. said the ridge had been weakened by centuries of freeze-thaw cycles and finally gave way. The Army's involvement was classified as a training exercise that happened to be in the area when the natural disaster occurred. But I know the truth. And so does Father Michael. The missing people started recovering within days of the explosion. The family we'd found in the circle began speaking again, though they never remembered what happened on the mountain. The hospital staff called it miraculous. I call it proof that sometimes when you stand up to evil, good actually wins. I left the Park Service a month later and enrolled in seminary. Figured if I was going to spend my life fighting devils, I might as well get the proper training. Father Michael and I have worked together ever since. He handles the prayers, I handle the explosives. Because here's what I learned on Devil's Backbone. Evil is real, and it's patient, and it never stops looking for ways to corrupt and destroy. But it's not unstoppable. It can be fought. It can be contained. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, it can even be defeated. The area where Devil's Backbone used to stand is permanently closed now. Official signs cite avalanche danger and unstable terrain. But every year on the winter solstice, Father Michael and I hike up there to make sure the seal is holding, because some prize. Sons need guards, and some evil is worth fighting, no matter the cost. Last winter we found new tracks in the snow near the collapse site. Not human tracks, something else. Something that walked on two legs but left prints like claws. They circled the buried ridge 3 times, then disappeared into the woods. Father Michael thinks it's just scavengers, animals drawn by old scents still trapped under the rocks. I think something's trying to dig its way out. Either way, we'll be ready. My name is Christopher Nightfall, and I've been fighting devils for over 50 years now. The work never ends, the enemy never sleeps, and the stakes are always higher than you think. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between battles, I remember that night on Devil's Backbone when 2 broken men stood against ancient evil and refused to yield. And I know that no matter how dark it gets, there's always light somewhere. You just have to be willing to fight for it. My name is Thomas Ravencroft, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in the Blue Ridge Mountains that October. The official report says it was a bear attack. That's a lie. I work at Shenandoah National Park, mostly around the Dark Hollow Falls area. It's beautiful country, rolling green hills, thick forests, streams that run clear and cold. I came here after losing my brother Danny in Korea. The mountains gave me peace when nothing else could. I thought I knew every trail, every cave, every dangerous spot in my section. I was wrong. October 15th, 1961 started like any other day. Cool morning air, leaves turning gold and red, tourists starting to thin out for the season. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when the call came in. Missing persons report, the Carter family from Richmond. Parents and 2 kids, ages 8 and 10. They'd been camping near Dark Hollow for 3 days. Supposed to check out yesterday morning, but never showed up at the front gate. Probably just lost track of time, I told myself. Happens all the time with city folks. They come up here thinking they're Daniel Boone, then get turned around on trails that all look the same to them. But something felt off when I reached their campsite. The tents were still up, perfectly neat. Food sat in pots over a cold fire, beans and hot dogs, half-cooked and covered with flies. Their sleeping bags were arranged in a perfect circle around the fire pit. Who does that? And their car keys were hanging from a tree branch 10 feet up. No way someone just tossed them there. I called out their names. Mr. Carter! Mrs. Carter! My voice echoed off the hollow walls, but nothing called back. Even the birds had gone quiet. That's when I found the bite marks. Deep gouges in the bark of an old oak tree, like someone had tried to eat the wood itself. But the marks were too big for any animal I knew, and they were at eye level for a grown man. Below the tree, I found scratches in the dirt. Symbols or letters, hard to tell. They looked like they'd been carved with fingernails. I took pictures, made notes, did everything by the book. But my hands were shaking a little when I wrote up the initial report. 14 years in these mountains, and I'd never seen anything like it. That evening, I stopped by the Cherokee Reservation on my way home. Old Joseph Crow Feather ran a trading post there. He'd lived in these mountains his whole life, and his grandfather before him. If anyone knew the local stories, it was Joseph. Missing family, you say? He was sorting through some pottery, not looking at me directly. Near Dark Hollow? You know something about that area? Joseph set down a clay bowl and finally met my eyes. My grandfather used to warn us about that place, called it the Hunger Hollow. Said something walked there that was always starving, always looking to feed. I laughed. Had to. Come on, Joseph. You don't believe in ghost stories. I believe in things that kill people, he said quietly. And that place has been killing people since before the white man came. I left thinking he was just being dramatic. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bite marks in the tree bark. Jake Morrison met me at the station the next morning. Jake was good people. Been my partner for 3 years, knew the mountains almost as well as I did. We planned to expand the search deeper into the hollow system. Maybe they wandered off the main trail, Jake suggested as we packed our gear. Got lost, set up camp somewhere else. I wanted to believe that, but when we found their station wagon, I knew we were dealing with something else entirely. The car was at the bottom of a T, 30-foot drop, nose first into a creek bed. The front end was smashed, but not from the fall. Something had pushed it over the edge. The rear bumper was crumpled inward, like massive hands. Had grabbed it and shoved. Jake rappelled down to check inside while I secured the ropes. "Thomas," he called up, "you need to see this." The inside of the car was covered in blood, not splattered like from an accident, pooled in the back seat like someone had been lying there, bleeding slowly. But there were no bodies. The blood was still sticky. "Where are they?" Jake asked. I didn't have an answer. People don't just vanish from a wrecked car, especially not while bleeding that much. We called for backup and started searching the creek bed. That's when we found the cave. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss, about 50 yards downstream from the car. From the outside, it looked like a natural formation. But inside was a room made of bones. Human bones, picked clean and white. Ribs formed the walls, skulls were stacked like stones. Leg bones had been sharpened into stakes. And hanging from the ceiling like some sick decoration were pieces of clothing. A red dress, a man's flannel shirt, children's sneakers. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. I was taking pictures when I noticed the smell, sweet and rotten, like meat left out in the sun, but mixed with something else, something sharp and hungry. If hunger had a smell, this was it. Jake found Mrs. Carter's wedding ring embedded in what looked like a human jawbone. The bone had been gnawed on recently. Teeth marks were still fresh. We backed out of the cave fast. "We need to call this in," Jake said, but his voice sounded strange, shaky. I reached for my radio, but it was dead. Full battery that morning, now nothing. Jake's was the same. Both our watches had stopped at 3:33. The temperature was dropping fast. Had to be 15 degrees colder than when we'd entered the hollow. Our breath came out in white puffs, even though it was a warm October day. That's when I heard Danny's voice. Tommy, where you?" My brother's voice, clear as day, calling from deeper in the cave system. The same voice I'd heard calling for help the day he died in Korea, the voice that haunted my dreams. "You hear that?" I asked Jake. "Hear what?" "Tommy, help me. I'm lost, Tommy." I took a step toward the sound before Jake grabbed my arm. "There's nobody there, Thomas. Just echoes." But I could hear him, my dead brother calling for help in a place he'd never been. We got out of there fast, but on the hike back to the car, Jake kept stopping to rest, said he was getting hungry, real hungry, even though we'd eaten lunch an hour before. "Just tired," he said, but his eyes looked different, sharper somehow, and he kept licking his lips. The backup team arrived that evening. Pete Kowalski and 2 rangers from the North District. Pete was a good man, 15 years on the job, tough as nails. But within an hour of briefing him on what we'd found, he was acting strange. "You boys got any food?" he asked. "I'm starving over here." Jake offered him a sandwich, but Pete tore into it like he hadn't eaten in days. Finished it in 4 bites, then asked for another, and another. That night, we set up camp near the cave to continue searching at first light. I volunteered for first watch, partly because I couldn't sleep, partly because I didn't trust the way Jake and Pete were looking at each other, like they were sizing each other up. Around midnight, our search dog, Rex, started whimpering. He was staring at something in the darkness beyond our firelight, ears flat against his head. When I tried to lead him toward whatever was bothering him, he planted his feet and refused to move. Rex had tracked missing hikers through blizzards, but he wouldn't take one step in that direction. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate alone. 20 yards from camp, I found children's clothing hanging from tree-toes, branches. Little sneakers and t-shirts, suspended 15 feet off the ground. No way they'd blown up there in the wind. Someone, or something, had placed them deliberately. When I got back to camp, Jake was gone. Pete was sitting by the fire gnawing on something. At first I thought it was jerky, but when the firelight hit it right, I saw the pink flesh underneath. "Pete, what are you eating?" He looked up at me with eyes that reflected the flames like an animal's. "Found some meat," he said. "Really good meat." It was his own arm. He'd been biting chunks out of his own forearm. I grabbed the radio to call for medical evacuation, but Jake came stumbling back into camp before I could get through. His shirt was torn, covered in dirt and something dark. Something that smelled like copper. "Where were you?" I demanded. "Had to take a leak," he said, but his teeth were red. I didn't sleep that night, just sat by the fire, watching Jake and Pete. They were whispering to each other, too quiet for me to hear. Every now and then one of them would look at me and lick his lips. The next morning, we found the Carter children. They were arranged in a circle in a clearing about a mile from the cave, positioned sitting up like they were having a tea party. But they'd been partially eaten, not by animals. The bite marks were too clean, too deliberate. Human bite marks. Jake threw up when he saw them, but Pete just stared, and I swear I saw him swallow hard, like he was trying not to drool. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Call in the FBI, the state police, everyone." But when we got back to where we'd left the vehicles, they were gone. All of them. Towed away or driven off, no way to tell. We were stuck in the hollow with whatever was hunting here. That's when I realized Jake and Pete weren't just acting strange. They were changing. Jake had lost at least 10 pounds since yesterday, but instead of looking weak, he looked lean and hungry, predatory. His teeth seemed sharper, and his fingernails had grown long and yellow. Pete was worse. He'd stopped talking and entirely just made soft growling sounds in his throat. He kept trying to bite things, tree bark, rocks, his own hand. When I tried to give him water, he knocked the canteen away and tried to bite my wrist. By afternoon, they were hunting me. I knew because I found their footprints circling our camp while I was gathering firewood. They'd been moving around the perimeter like wolves, getting closer each time. And the footprints were wrong, too long, with claw marks where the toes should be. When I confronted them, they just smiled. Their teeth had become pointed. That evening, the real horror showed itself. I was alone in the ranger station, having barricaded myself inside when Jake and Pete started prowling around the building like animals. I'd managed to get the radio working long enough to call for backup, but the nearest team was hours away. Something scratched at the door, long, deliberate scrapes like claws on wood. "Thomas," Jake's voice, but different, hungry. "Let us in, partner. We're so hungry." "Go away, Jake. Fight this thing. You're still in there." "No," said another voice, a woman's voice. "I'm not Jake anymore." The scratching stopped. Everything went quiet. Then the windows exploded inward. Mr. Carter came through the front window. At least, it had been Mr. Carter once. Now he was 8 feet tall, thin as a scarecrow, with arms that hung down to his knees. His fingers ended in black claws, and his mouth was full of needle teeth. His skin was gray-white, stretched tight over jutting bones. Mrs. Carter came through the side window. She still wore her red dress, but it was torn and bloody. Her face was beautiful and terrible, eyes black as coal. When she spoke, it was in my mother's voice. "Tommy, sweetheart, why won't you feed us? We're so very hungry." The Carter children came through the back door. Still looked like kids, except for the mouths full of shark teeth and the way they moved on all fours like spiders. "We want to play," they said in unison. "We want to feed." Jake and Pete flanked them, no longer human at all, just hunger, given shape. "You can't run anymore, Thomas," Mr. Carter said. His voice was like wind through dead leaves. "You've breathed our air, walked in our hollow. The hunger is already inside you." He was right. I could feel it gnawing at my stomach, even though I'd eaten an hour ago. A desperate, aching need that food couldn't fill. I wanted to bite something, someone. "This is how it spreads," Mrs. Carter explained in my mother's gentle voice. "The hunger passes from one to another. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll help us feed." I backed against the far wall, but there was nowhere to go. 6 sets of black eyes stared at me, 6 mouths dripping with saliva. Then I remembered what my grandfather used to say about wendigos. Old stories from his time in Alaska. Fire. They feared fire above all else. I still had emergency flares in my gear bag, 3 of them. "You're right," I told them, pulling out the first flare. "I am hungry." I pulled the cap and the flare burst into brilliant red light. The wendigos shrieked and fell back, covering their eyes. "But I'm hungry for something else." I lit the second flare and threw it at the curtains. The fabric went up fast, flames racing toward the ceiling. "I'm hungry for justice." The third flare went into my equipment locker, where I kept extra fuel for the generator. The explosion knocked me flat and set half the station on fire. The wendigos were screaming now, a sound like metal tearing. Mr. Carter lunged at me through the flames, his claws raking across my chest. But the fire was spreading, and they couldn't get close enough to finish me. Jake's wendigo form was burning, but for just a moment his human eyes looked out at me. "Thomas," he whispered. "Thank you." Then the roof came down. I crawled out through a window as the whole building went up. The wendigos followed, but they were burning now, their gray skin peeling away up like old paper. They ran screaming into the forest, trails of fire marking their path. All except Mr. Carter. He stood in the doorway, fully ablaze but still upright. When he spoke, it was in Danny's voice. "You can't save everyone, Tommy. You never could." Then he collapsed into ash. I told the investigators it was a bear attack. A mother bear with cubs defending her territory. Everyone believed it because it made sense. Bears they could understand. What really happened in that hollow? Nobody would believe that. The government boys showed up 3 days later. Declared the whole area off limits due to geological instability. They bulldozed what was left of the ranger station and put up warning signs. The official report listed 4 rangers killed by wildlife, 1 survivor with severe burns and trauma. They transferred me to Arizona. Desert posting, they said. Change of scenery would do me good. But the hunger followed me. Not the wendigo hunger. I fought that off with fire and will. This was different. A gnawing emptiness that food couldn't fill. An awareness of something missing from the world, something broken that couldn't be fixed. I still wake up thinking about those families who went camping in the Blue Ridge Mountains and never came home. How many others over the years? The government sealed those files, but I know the wendigo didn't start with the Carters. Joseph Crow Feather was right. That hollow had been hungry for a long time. 6 months after Arizona, I got a letter. No return address, postmarked from Virginia. Inside was a single sentence written in a shaky hand. "The hollow still hungers, brother." I burned the letter, but I kept the envelope. Sometimes, late at night when the desert wind howls like a living thing, I take it out and stare at the postmark. October 15th, 1962. Exactly 1 year after I lit those flares. Danny's handwriting. My brother, R, died in Korea 10 years ago. I know because I identified his body myself. But sometimes when the hunger gets bad and I can't sleep, I hear his voice calling from the darkness outside my trailer. Tommy? Tommy, I'm so hungry. Won't you help me feed? I keep flares by my bed now, just in case, because some hungers never die. They just wait in the dark, patient as death, until someone new wanders into their hollow. The official report says it was a bear attack. That's a lie. But some lies are the only truth people can handle.